Long before the last ice age reached its final dramatic retreat, the world of the mammoths was already shaped by forces far harsher than cold alone. It was a world where wind carved the land with relentless precision, where the sky often darkened with clouds of fine silt, and where the ground itself shimmered with the residue of ancient glaciers. Scientists estimate that throughout large stretches of the late Pleistocene, the great grassland belt known as the Mammoth Steppe was up to 20 times dustier than the surrounding Ice Age landscape, creating a climate that seems almost impossible for large mammals to endure. And yet, mammoths not only survived in this environment, they thrived for hundreds of thousands of years. Understanding how they managed this feat offers us a remarkable insight into adaptation, resilience, and the evolution of life under extreme conditions. The Mammoth Steppe stretched across an enormous territory, from Western Europe through Siberia and all the way to Alaska via the Bering Land Bridge. Though frozen in winter and cool in summer, it was not a land of heavy snow or thick ice. Instead, it was profoundly dry. Much of Earth's water was locked into gigantic ice sheets, leaving the atmosphere thin and the land bare. Winds raced across the plains with incredible force, picking up microscopic particles from exposed glacial deposits and scattering them across continents. With each storm, a new layer of dust settled on the soil, creating a rich mineral base that shaped the region's ecosystems. Paradoxically, this dust, harsh, abrasive, and ever-present, was the foundation of life. It prevented large forests from taking root, ensuring the region remained open and sunlit. It enriched the soil with phosphorus, potassium, calcium, and other minerals essential to plant growth. As a result, the Mammoth Steppe supported one of the most productive grassland environments Earth has ever seen. Beneath skies filled with wind-blown powder, countless herds of mammoths, bison, horses, woolly rhinoceroses, and muskoxen roamed across a vast natural pasture. Mammoths were uniquely engineered for such an environment, though they may appear simply as hairy elephants. Their bodies were masterpieces of Arctic survival. Their coats were dense and layered, trapping air for insulation. Beneath their skin lay a thick layer of fat, up to 10 centimeters deep, that shielded them from freezing temperatures and sudden changes in weather. Their ears were small, reducing heat loss and preventing frostbite. Even the signature hump on a woolly mammoth's back was not merely decorative, it stored fat reserves for hard times, a built-in biological insurance policy in a land where snowfall or dust storms could briefly limit access to food. But perhaps the most fascinating adaptation was hidden within their blood. Modern elephants struggle in cold weather because their hemoglobin releases oxygen poorly at low temperatures. Mammoths, however, evolved a unique form of hemoglobin that functioned efficiently even when frozen winds dominated the landscape. This molecular adaptation allowed them to remain active, strong, and mobile when nearly all other large mammals would have weakened. Food in such a dusty world might seem scarce, but in reality, the Mammoth Steppe was astonishingly productive. The same dust that stung the eyes and coated the fur of animals also fertilized the soil. Steppe grasses and sedges absorbed mineral particles and flourished, carpeting the land with nutritious vegetation. Mammoths were perfectly adapted to consume this type of food. Their molars were high-crowned, ridged, and designed to withstand constant grinding against the gritty, dust-coated plants. These teeth wore down slowly, allowing mammoths to process large quantities of fibrous, abrasive vegetation. Their long tusks served as tools for sweeping away snow, exposing grass beneath, and scraping bark or digging for roots when needed. But their success cannot be explained by anatomy alone. Mammoths lived in complex social groups, much like modern elephants. Herds offered protection, shared knowledge of feeding grounds, and improved chances of survival for calves. In a landscape where dust storms could obscure the world for hours or even days, the presence of the herd created structure, direction, and safety. Older females likely guided younger members across dangerous terrain, leading them to fresh grazing land after storms had reshaped the landscape. It is also important to recognize that the dustier climate did not simply reflect an extreme version of the Ice Age. It created its own ecological identity. Without dust, grasses would not have regenerated so quickly, and the steppe would have collapsed. Without grasses, massive herbivores like mammoths would have vanished long before humans ever encountered them. This delicate interplay between geology, wind, climate, and life remained stable for tens of thousands of years. The mammoths evolved within this system, molded by it and ultimately dependent on it. The question, then, is not merely why mammoths survived such an environment, but how such an environment shaped their evolution. They thrived because they matched the world they lived in, biologically, behaviorally, and ecologically. They benefited from the productivity of the steppe, exploited its rich but dusty grasslands, and developed specialized traits unmatched by most Ice Age animals. Yet this success was fragile. When the last Ice Age ended and the climate warmed, the winds weakened, moisture returned, and forests spread into the former grasslands. The dust-driven ecosystem that had endured for millennia disappeared. The grasses retreated, the ground softened, and the ecological foundation supporting mammoth life collapsed. Combined with human hunting pressure and shrinking habitats, the disappearance of the dusty steppe marked the beginning of the mammoth's decline. Ironically, the very force that once sustained them, dust, may have played a role in their extinction. When the storms faded and vegetation patterns changed, their highly specialized bodies had fewer opportunities to thrive. And so, the story of how mammoths survived in a climate 20 times dustier than the rest of the Ice Age is not merely a tale of endurance. It is a story of perfect adaptation to a unique, demanding world. It is a testament to the power of evolution to meet environmental challenges with extraordinary solutions. And finally, it is a reminder that survival often depends not on the harshness of a landscape, but on how elegantly a species fits into the place it calls home. Close your eyes. Let the sturdy walls of your room dissolve into the mist of time. Let the hum of modern life fade, replaced by the low, resonant thrum of wind moving over an endless horizon. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your city and local time in the comments so we can see where everyone is listening from. Now, breathe in. The air here is not the crisp, sterile cold of a winter postcard. It is thick, textured, and smells of crushed stone and ancient sage. We are standing in the middle of the Great Steppe, roughly 30,000 years ago. The light here is strange, diffused by a high suspended haze of glacial flour, that fine powdery dust ground by the movement of ice sheets miles away. It turns the midday sun into a soft, glowing pearl, casting long, indistinct shadows that seem to stretch for miles. You can feel the grit on your skin, a dry, gentle exfoliation that never really ceases. It settles on your eyelashes, on the heavy fur of the creatures moving slowly in the distance, and weaves itself into the very fabric of this world. This is not a barren desert, nor is it a deep snowfield. It is a landscape of gold and gray, a rolling ocean of dry grass that hisses softly as the gale sweeps through it. To our left, a massive shape shifts, a mountain breathing. It is a woolly mammoth, calm and unbothered by the stinging air. She is darker than you might expect, her shaggy coat a deep earthy brown that blends perfectly with the peat and the dust. If she were to shake herself now, a cloud would rise from her back like smoke from a grand old rug beaten on a Sunday morning, a testament to just how much of the earth she carries with her. She is a walking archive of the landscape. Historians and geologists still argue whether the skies ever truly cleared completely during these millennia, or if the creatures of the steppe lived in a perpetual golden twilight caused by the atmospheric load of silt. It creates a dreamlike quality to the day, softening the edges of reality. The cold here is dry, biting but clean, lacking the damp heaviness of a modern winter. It preserves everything. The silence is profound, broken only by the rhythmic crunch of heavy feet on dry turf, and the occasional deep rumbling contact call that resonates more in your chest than in your ears. This is their kingdom, a realm built on wind and dust, and tonight we walk unseen beside them, safe in the shadows of giants. We move closer now, drifting like a cloud of vapor toward the massive shape standing firm against the gale, and as we approach, The true genius of her construction becomes visible, a marvel of biological engineering designed not merely to endure this hostile world, but to ignore it entirely. To understand how a creature the size of a small building survives in a wind tunnel 20 times dustier than the modern Arctic, we must look past the silhouette and study the architecture of warmth that keeps her alive. She is a fortress built of biology. The wind here is a physical weight, pressing against everything, carrying that relentless payload of abrasive silt, but it meets its match in the mammoth's outer wall. Her coat is not a single layer, but a complex two-tiered defense system that has taken millions of years to perfect. The outer layer, known as the guard hairs, hangs in long, shaggy curtains, some strands reaching nearly a meter in length, swaying hypnotically in the breeze like the heavy tapestries of a forgotten castle. These hairs are coarse, thick, and tough, nature's version of a heavy canvas tarp. They are not designed for softness, they are designed for shielding. They intercept the biting wind and the flying grit, stopping the abrasive particles from ever reaching the sensitive skin beneath. If you were to run your hand along her flank, assuming she would allow such a familiarity, the texture would be rough, almost wire-like, a sensation of raw durability. But this shaggy exterior is merely the roof of the house. The true insulation lies beneath. Hidden under that skirt of long hair is the underwool, a dense spiraling mat of fine fur that feels like softest cashmere. It is thick, nearly 4 inches deep, and it traps a layer of air that stays perpetually warm, heated by the furnace of her massive body. This trapped air is the secret. No matter how violently the storm rages outside, no matter how much dust whips through the air, the temperature against her skin remains tropical, a personal microclimate that she carries with her wherever she goes. It is a cozy thought, imagining that within that imposing, weather-beaten exterior, she is wrapped in a permanent embrace of summer warmth. One of the most critical, yet often overlooked adaptations for this dusty, drying wind is the oil. Mammoths, unlike their modern elephant cousins, possessed sebaceous glands, oil-producing factories within their skin that secreted a thick, greasy substance into their fur. This was not merely for grooming, it was a waterproofing and dust-proofing seal. In a climate where the air is so dry it can crack the earth, this oil kept their skin supple and prevented the microscopic shards of glacial dust from irritating their hides. It gave their coats a slightly matted, heavy look and likely a distinct musky scent, the smell of wet wool, lanolin, and earth, but it ensured that the dry wind could not suck the moisture from their bodies. She is, in essence, wearing a heavy oiled raincoat over a thermal sweater, a combination so effective that snow does not even melt when it lands on her back. It simply sits there, unable to steal a single calorie of heat from the engine room below. As we observe her head, turned slightly away from the gust, we notice the specific geometry of heat conservation. Evolution is a ruthless editor, trimming away anything that wastes energy, and in the freezing winds of the steppe, large appendages are a liability. A modern African elephant uses its massive ears like radiators, flapping them to dump excess heat. Here, that would be a death sentence. The mammoth's ears are tiny by comparison, roughly the size of a human torso but appearing almost comically small against her gigantic skull, tucked tightly against her neck to minimize surface area. They are lined with thick fur, protecting the delicate blood vessels inside from frostbite. It is a design choice that says, quite clearly, that hearing is important, but keeping your blood warm is non-negotiable. Her tail, too, is a lesson in minimalism. While modern elephants have long, swaying tails to swat flies, the mammoth's tail is short, stubby, and features a specialized flap of skin, a biological storm shutter that covers the anus to prevent cold air from entering the body core. It is a detail that rarely makes it into museum exhibits, perhaps for reasons of modesty, but it is a brilliant adaptation for a creature that spends half its life with its back to a freezing wind. Nature, it seems, thinks of everything, even if it lacks a certain sense of decorum. There's a fascinating debate that still circulates in the quiet corners of university paleontology departments regarding the true color of these magnificent coats. For decades, we assumed they were a uniform, dark chocolate brown, based on the frozen specimens pulled from the Siberian permafrost. However, recent genetic analysis has thrown a splash of color into this monochrome world. Historians and geneticists still argue whether the ginger mammoths, those with lighter reddish-blonde coats, were a common sight on the steppe, or if the reddish hue found on mummies is merely a chemical trick played by thousands of years of burial in iron-rich soil. Some argue that the gene MC1R, which controls pigmentation and gives humans red hair and freckles, was present in mammoths in a version that reduced dark pigment. Imagine, if you will, a herd that isn't just a wall of brown, but a mosaic of auburn, chestnut, and perhaps even a strawberry blonde calf trotting clumsily behind its mother, looking for all the world like a very large, very confused golden retriever. Regardless of the exact shade, the function remains the masterpiece. The coat is heavy, weighing dozens of pounds, a burden she bears with slow, deliberate grace. Watch now as a sudden gust picks up, a dust devil spinning across the plain, lifting a veil of white silt into the air. The other animals, the nervous horses, the skittish bison, turn and brace themselves, squinting against the grit. The mammoth simply lowers her head. Her eyelashes are long and thick, acting as screens to filter the air before it touches her eyes. She doesn't blink, she doesn't shiver. She stands as a monument to stability in a chaotic atmosphere. This physical resilience allows her to do something the smaller creatures cannot. She can afford to be slow. She does not need to run to shelter because she is the shelter. This is vividly illustrated by the small form pressing against her leg, a calf barely reaching her belly. The youngster is fuzzy, almost spherical with baby fat and new fur, looking a bit like a plush toy that has been overstuffed. He tucks himself into the lee of her flank, escaping the wind. For him, the world is not a dusty, freezing plain. It is a wall of warm, shaggy hair and the rhythmic thumping of his mother's heart. He learns early that survival is a game of proximity. In this 20 times dustier world, getting lost means losing the heat source, and the herd is effectively a moving radiator. The anatomy of the mammoth is a testament to the idea that life does not just endure an environment, it internalizes it. The cold shape their ears, the wind shape their hair, the dust shape their skin. They are the steppe-made flesh. But fur and fat, for all their brilliance, are static defenses. They are the walls of the castle, not the garrison inside. To truly understand how they conquered this hostile landscape, we must look deeper, past the skin and bone, into the very fluid that courses through their veins. For as the temperature drops and the wind howls, a different kind of magic is happening on a molecular level, a silent chemical evolution that keeps the fires burning when the world outside has frozen solid. Deep within the cavernous chest of the matriarch, shielded by the shaggy fortress of her coat and the thick insulation of her fat, a massive heart, weighing perhaps nearly 30 pounds, beats with a slow, hypnotic rhythm. It is the engine of the herd, a biological metronome that has ticked steadily through storms that could strip paint from wood. But the true miracle of the mammoth is not the strength of this heart, it is the liquid it propels. To understand why this is so extraordinary, we must consider the invisible cruelty of the cold. In the freezing temperatures of the mammoth steppe, where the wind chill can drop far below zero, the laws of chemistry usually conspire against life. For most mammals, including the mammoth's tropical cousins, the Asian and African elephants, the cold is a thief that steals oxygen. Hemoglobin, the complex protein inside red blood cells responsible for carrying oxygen from the lungs to the tissues, is notoriously temperature sensitive. In a warm environment, it acts like a generous courier, eagerly handing over its parcel of oxygen to the muscles that need it. But as blood cools down, which it inevitably does as it travels away from the warm core of the body and down into the long, exposed legs or the tip of a trunk, normal hemoglobin becomes stingy. It holds onto its oxygen tightly, refusing to release it to the cold tissues. This is a disaster for an animal standing on permafrost. It leads to sluggish muscles, nerve damage, and eventually, the blackening necrosis of frostbite. A modern elephant walking across the Siberian steppe would find its extremities failing simply because its own blood refused to do its job in the cold. But the woolly mammoth was running a different operating system entirely. Hidden within the genetic code of these ancient giants was a series of tiny, precise mutations that altered the shape of their hemoglobin. It was a molecular masterstroke. This specialized blood was temperature resilient, designed to function as an all-terrain vehicle for oxygen. As the matriarch's blood flows away from her massive heart and descends down her long, pillar-like legs, cooling rapidly as it nears the frozen ground, the hemoglobin does not lock up. It remains loose, flexible, and generous. It unloads its oxygen into the muscles of her toes and the delicate tissues at the very tip of her trunk with the same efficiency as if she were standing in the sweltering heat of a savanna. This allowed mammoths to keep their extremities warm and functional, even when standing ankle-deep in snow or navigating the abrasive, freezing dust storms for days on end. It is the reason she can use her trunk, a complex organ containing over 40,000 muscles but 0 bones, to deftly pluck a tuft of dry grass from the frozen earth without fumbling. Without this anti-freeze adaptation in her blood chemistry, her trunk would become stiff and useless in the winter, a tragedy for an animal that relies on its nose as a hand, a tool, and a social instrument. Nature, in her wisdom, realized that a warm coat is useless if the hands are too cold to eat dinner. There is something profoundly ghostly about how we know this. We cannot observe the blood of a living mammoth flowing in real time, but we have done the next best thing. In a feat that blurs the line between paleontology and necromancy, scientists in our time were able to extract DNA from frozen mammoth bones, identify the specific genes for hemoglobin, and insert them into modern bacteria. The bacteria then acted as microscopic factories, churning out actual mammoth hemoglobin proteins for the first time in thousands of years. When researchers tested this resurrected blood in the lab, they watched it perform its chemical magic, confirming exactly how it defied the cold. It is a rare moment where we do not have to guess at history. We have held the very molecules of survival in a test tube. Historians and biologists still argue whether this adaptation was a rapid response to a sudden cooling event or a slow, agonizing tweak over millions of years as the elephant's ancestors drifted north. Did the blood change before the coat, or did the coat buy time for the blood to evolve? It is the classic riddle of the chicken and the egg. Only the chicken weighs 6 tons and has tusks. Regardless of the timeline, the result is a creature that is chemically liberated from the tyranny of the thermometer. This internal warmth allows for a behavior that seems almost counterintuitive in such a harsh land. Stillness. Watch the herd now. They are not frantically pacing to generate heat. They are conserving energy. The matriarch stands perfectly still, her trunk draped over one tusk in a posture of relaxed contemplation. Her blood is doing the work so her muscles don't have to. This efficiency is vital because the world they live in is demanding. Every calorie burned must be replaced, and in a landscape dominated by dust and dry grass, food is fuel. The blood keeps the machine running, but the machine is hungry. And this brings us to the great paradox of their existence. We often imagine the Ice Age as a time of scarcity, a barren white wasteland where animals scraped by on the brink of starvation. But as the wind picks up again, swirling that ever-present gray flower around the legs of the herd, we are reminded of the strange truth of the mammoth steppe. This dust, the very stuff that clogs the air and irritates the eyes, is not an enemy. It is a delivery system. It is the reason the matriarch is standing here at all. The gale that batters her flank is carrying the ingredients for a feast, provided you have the right equipment to harvest it. The relationship between the mammoth and the dust is one of the most complex ecological marriages in history. To the human eye, the dust is a nuisance. It gets into everything. If you were there, you would feel it grinding slightly between your teeth, a gritty reminder of the geology around you. But for the mammoth, this dust is the secret to the menu. The silt, known to geologists as loess, is rich in minerals ground down by the sheer weight of glaciers pulverizing bedrock. It is a nutrient bomb waiting to explode. When the wind deposits this loess across the plains, it rejuvenates the soil, allowing it to support a specific type of vegetation that is distinct from the boggy tundra of the modern Arctic. This is the mammoth steppe, a biome that no longer really exists on Earth. It was a dry, cold grassland, more similar to the African savanna than the wet, mossy tundra we see in Siberia today. It was a sea of protein-rich grasses, herbs, and tiny flowering plants, all fed by the constant rain of glacial fertilizer. The blood keeps the mammoth warm so that she can wander this vast, dusty garden, seeking out the patches where the wind has worked its magic. However, there is a catch. There is always a catch. While the dust makes the grass nutritious, it also makes it dangerous. The vegetation here is not soft and lush like a meadow in a fairy tale. It is tough, dry, and coated in a fine layer of abrasive grit. Eating dinner on the mammoth steppe is essentially like eating a salad that has been dropped in a sandpit. For any ordinary animal, chewing this grit-covered grass day in and day out would be a disaster. The sand would act like sandpaper, grinding teeth down to the gum line in a matter of years, leading to starvation and death. A creature cannot survive if its tools for eating wear out before its life is over. And yet, the matriarch chews with a slow, rhythmic grinding motion, unbothered by the crunch of silica against enamel. She does this for up to 20 hours a day, processing hundreds of pounds of this abrasive fuel. She is not just surviving the cold, she is surviving the very food she eats. As the twilight deepens and the purple shadows of the steppe stretch out like fingers across the snow-dusted grass, we must turn our attention to the machinery inside her mouth. For if the blood is the miracle that keeps her warm, her teeth are the industrial grinders that keep her alive, built to fight a war against the very dust that sustains her. To understand the purpose of such formidable dental machinery, we must look away from the animal for a moment and gaze out at the empire that necessitated it, a landscape that defies our modern understanding of the Arctic. We often picture the Ice Age as a world buried under deep crushing snow, a white silence where life struggled to keep its head above the drifts. But the reality of the mammoth's world was radically different. If you were to walk north from where the matriarch stands, trekking all the way to what is now the drowned land bridge of Beringia, you would not be trudging through waist-deep powder. You would be walking on firm, dry ground. The same ferocious wind that filled the air with blinding silt also stripped the land of snow, sweeping the plains bare and exposing the vegetation to the sun. This was the mammoth steppe, the largest biome on the planet at the time, a singular ecological ribbon that wrapped around the top of the globe like a tawny crown. It was an environment defined by its lack of moisture. Because so much of the world's water was locked up in massive continental ice sheets, the air was parched, unable to hold the humidity needed for heavy snowfall. This created a dry, frozen savanna, a cold mirror image of the African plains, where the horizon was not a wall of white, but a sea of gold, gray, and sage green. It is a landscape that has largely vanished from the earth, leaving us with only pockets of remnant flora in isolated valleys to hint at its former glory. This dryness was the key to the paradox. In a wet world, the cold would have created bogs, mosses, and deep snow, terrain that is treacherous for a 6-ton animal and biologically useless for a grazer that needs high-calorie fuel. Moss is starvation food. It fills the belly but offers little energy. But here, in the dust-choked gale, the soil remained firm and the plants grew rich. The dust itself, that constant irritating rain of glacial flour, acted as a continuous top-dressing of fertilizer. It brought calcium to build bones, phosphorus to fuel metabolism, and potassium to regulate fluids. It encouraged the growth of not just simple grass, but a diverse salad bar of high-protein forbs, wildflowers, herbs, sagebrush, and sedges. These plants were quick-growing, sun-loving, and packed with the nutrition needed to power a megafauna ecosystem. Scientists and botanists have spent years analyzing the pollen trapped in ancient soil cores, and they have found that this wasn't a monoculture. It was a riot of diversity. In the short, frantic summer, the steppe would explode into color, a carpet of anemones, poppies, and asters, all trembling under the dusty wind. For a few months, the Ice Age looked more like a wild, overgrown garden, buzzing with insects, and alive with the scent of crushing herbs. This abundance explains how the land could support not just mammoths, but vast herds of bison, horses, and reindeer, all living shoulder to shoulder in densities that rival the modern Serengeti. It was a crowded, noisy, vibrant world, fueled entirely by the grit that clouded the sky. However, there is no such thing as a free lunch in nature, and the price of this abundance was the texture. The plants of the mammoth steppe were survivors. To withstand the drying wind and the freezing temperatures, they became tough, fibrous, and hardened with silica. They were less like the soft lawn grass of a suburban backyard, and more like wire brushes growing out of the earth. When the wind blew, the dry stalks would rattle against each other like dry bones, and because the ground was so dry and dusty, every mouthful of grass came with a generous side order of soil. A mammoth pulling up a trunkful of sedge wasn't just eating vegetation, it was eating the geology. The roots of these plants were often shallow, so pulling them up meant ingesting the grit clinging to them. Over a lifetime of 60 years, a mammoth would process mountains of this abrasive mixture. It is a testament to life's tenacity that the most productive ecosystem of the epoch was also the one most likely to sandblast you from the inside out. The paradox is complete. The dust created the food, but the dust ruined the food. To survive here, you didn't just need a warm coat or antifreeze blood. You needed a way to process a diet that was effectively sandpaper. This brings us to a small, often overlooked detail of the landscape: the lack of trees. The dust and the dryness made it nearly impossible for forests to take hold. Trees need deep moisture and stability. The steppe offered neither. For the mammoth, this was perfect. They were creatures of the open horizon. Trees are obstacles. They block the view of predators. They limit the movement of the herd. And honestly, they are just things to walk into when you aren't paying attention. The open steppe meant that the matriarch could communicate with her sisters miles away using low-frequency rumbles that traveled unimpeded through the ground and air. It meant that the herd could spot a pack of wolves or a cave lion from a great distance. But it also meant there was no shade. In the height of summer, when the sun beat down through the haze, the steppe could be surprisingly warm, and the dust would hang in the shimmering heat waves. The animals would have to rely entirely on their own bodies and the micro-terrain, the dips and gullies carved by meltwater, for relief. It was a world of total exposure. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to shelter, except within the group. As the sun begins to dip lower, painting the dust clouds in bruised shades of purple and charcoal, the wind shifts, bringing a fresh wave of grit from the north. The herd turns their backs to it, a synchronized rotation of shaggy hulks. They lower their heads to resume feeding, the rhythmic tearing of grass the only sound competing with the gale. They are standing in the most fertile landscape of their time, a breadbasket built of silt, eating the riches of the earth. But every bite is a challenge, every mouthful is a test of endurance, and deep inside the matriarch's skull, the heavy layered plates of her molars are engaging in their slow, grinding war, a battle of biology against geology that has been waging since her birth. It is time to look into the mouth of the beast to understand the specific engineering required to turn a landscape of glass and stone into the flesh and blood of a giant. To witness the engineering marvel that kept the mammoth alive, we must imagine peering into the mouth of the giant, a cavern of pink flesh and crushing power. It is a space designed not for delicacy, but for industrial-scale processing. If you were to hold a single mammoth molar in your hands, and it would take both hands, for these teeth are the size of a shoebox and weigh upwards of 4 pounds, you would not recognize it as a tooth in the traditional sense. It bears no resemblance to the pointed canine of a wolf or the simple incisor of a human. Instead, it looks like a piece of heavy machinery, or perhaps the sole of a very rugged hiking boot. The surface is not white and smooth. It is a landscape of its own, a series of flat parallel ridges running across the face of the tooth like the treads of a tank. This is the washboard design, the ultimate answer to the problem of a dusty world. The genius of this design lies in its composite construction. A mammoth tooth is built from huge vertical plates of enamel, the hardest substance in the biological world, glued together by softer materials called dentine and cementum. As the mammoth chews, sliding her massive lower jaw forward and backward in a rhythmic pendulum motion, the softer materials wear away faster than the hard enamel. This differential wear keeps the ridges sharp, ensuring that the tooth surface remains rough and file-like for its entire existence. It is a self-sharpening tool. This is crucial because the grass she is eating is, for all intents and purposes, made of glass. Steppe grass is rich in phytoliths, microscopic silica structures that give the plant rigidity, and when combined with a layer of glacial dust coating every stalk, the result is a diet that is incredibly abrasive. A lesser tooth would be smoothed down to a useless nub in months. The mammoth's molar, however, is a biological millstone, capable of pulverizing this grit-laden salad into a digestible pulp hour after hour, year after year. But even the hardest stone wears down eventually. In a world this abrasive, where the very air adds grit to every meal, no single tooth could last a lifetime. Here, nature deployed a strategy known to paleontologists as the marching molars. Unlike humans, who grow a set of baby teeth and replace them vertically with adult ones, mammoths, and modern elephants, developed a horizontal conveyor belt system. They have 6 sets of teeth throughout their lives. As the chewing surface of the active molar is ground down by the relentless dust and silica, it slowly moves forward in the jaw, eventually fragmenting and falling out at the front. Meanwhile, a fresh, larger, brand-new molar is pushing forward from the back of the jaw to take its place. It is a slow-motion rotation of equipment, ensuring that the animal always has a fresh grinding surface to tackle the harsh environment. This adaptation was the dividing line between success and failure in the north. It is the primary reason why the woolly mammoth thrived on the open steppe, while its distant cousin, the mastodon, clung to the forests. The mastodon had teeth with high cone-like cusps, designed for crushing twigs and leaves, a browser's tooth. On the dusty plains, those teeth would have been destroyed. The mammoth, with its high-crowned, flat-plated grinders, was a grazer built for the grit. Historians and evolutionary biologists still argue whether this dental evolution drove the mammoths out of the forests, or if moving on to the plains forced the evolution of the teeth. It is likely a dance of both, a feedback loop where better teeth allowed access to dustier food, which in turn favored even tougher teeth. There's a quiet tragedy built into the system, however, a biological clock that ticks in time with the chewing. A mammoth gets 6 sets of teeth. That is the limit. The first 3 sets are small, used during calfhood and adolescence. The 4th and 5th sets carry them through their prime years, massive bricks of enamel that power the growth of their immense bodies. But the 6th set, the final molars, must last them for the rest of their lives. These last teeth usually erupt when the mammoth is around 30 years old and can remain functional until they are 60. But the dust never stops. The wind never ceases to deposit its abrasive flour on the grass. Slowly, inexorably, the final set wears down. When the last ridges are smoothed away, the animal can no longer process food. It can still eat, but it cannot chew. This leads to a gentle, slow decline known as malnutrition of the elderly. It is a poignant thought that the mightiest creature on the steppe, immune to the cold and the wolf, is ultimately defeated by the friction of grass against stone. Yet, this system is incredibly efficient while it lasts. The jaw muscles required to operate these millstones are enormous. The skull of the mammoth is vastly different from that of an elephant. It is taller, more domed. This high forehead isn't for a larger brain, though they were intelligent, but to serve as an anchor point for the massive temporalis muscles that work the jaw. The leverage is immense. When the matriarch clamps down on a mouthful of dry, dusty fescue, the force is staggering. She is not just chewing, she is crushing the cellular structure of the plant to release the nutrients locked inside. It is a labor-intensive way to eat. She must spend up to 18 hours a day feeding to fuel her furnace. The sound of a herd eating is a constant background noise of the Pleistocene, a rhythmic scraping crunch that resembles the sound of walking on gravel multiplied by 100. This constant chewing also generates heat. Just as the fermentation of grass in her massive gut acts as an internal radiator, the physical act of grinding creates warmth in the muscles of the head and neck. In the dead of winter, when the temperature plunges to 40 below and the wind is screaming across the ice, the simple act of dinner helps keep the blood flowing. It is a holistic survival system where every action serves the dual purpose of nutrition and thermoregulation. The dust, the grass, the tooth, and the muscle are all locked in a cycle of energy exchange. There is a softness to this mechanical reality, a strange comfort in the reliability of it. The matriarch knows nothing of enamel plates or silica phytoliths. She only knows the rhythm: bite, grind, swallow, step, bite, grind. It is the cadence of her life, a steady beat that underpins the howling of the wind. As she chews, she often closes her eyes, her long lashes catching the snowflakes or the dust motes, appearing to be in a state of deep meditation. Perhaps she is. Chewing is a repetitive, soothing action. In a world of constant low-level danger, the ability to process food efficiently allows her to stay calm, to stay heavy, to stay strong. Occasionally, a small stone, a piece of actual gravel, not just dust, will find its way into the mix. A lesser creature might crack a tooth. The mammoth simply pauses, works the obstruction to the side with her massive fleshy tongue, and spits it out with a surprising delicacy, or simply crushes it if it is small enough, adding a bit more mineral content to her diet. One imagines her thinking, with a distinct lack of enthusiasm, "Ah, more rocks. Delicious." It is a rough life, but she is built for rough work. As the herd moves slowly forward, cropping the tops of the sagebrush, the dust swirling around their ankles, we begin to see that their survival is not just about individual anatomy. A single mammoth with perfect teeth is still vulnerable if she is alone. The wind is too loud, the visibility too poor, the predators too cunning. The physical adaptations, the coat, the blood, the teeth, are the hardware of survival. But the software, the operating system that truly allows them to dominate this gray, swirling world, is found in the connections between them. The matriarch stops chewing for a moment, lifting her trunk to sniff the air, sensing a shift in the wind that we cannot feel. She turns her head and the entire herd turns with her. It is time to explore the invisible web that binds them together, the social wisdom that navigates the whiteout. The wind, which has been a constant nagging companion all day, now shifts its tone, deepening from a whistle to a roar, and with it, the world begins to vanish. On the mammoth steppe, danger does not always come with teeth. Often, it arrives as a wall of erasing white and gray. A dust storm is building, mixing with the spindrift of dry snow to create a whiteout so dense that the horizon dissolves completely. For a solitary animal, this is a moment of supreme terror, a time when direction becomes meaningless, and the cold begins to hunt in earnest. But the mammoth is not solitary. As the visibility drops to less than a trunk's length, the matriarch stops chewing. She stands motionless for a second, her massive head raised, ears flared not to hear, but to feel. She is the oldest member of this family, perhaps 50 winters deep in experience, and her mind is a living atlas of the steppe. She remembers this specific wind, this specific taste of grit in the air. It signals a storm that will not pass in an hour. It is a siege. Slowly, deliberately, she turns her body against the gale and emits a sound that you would not hear, even if you were standing right beside her. It is an infrasonic rumble, a frequency so low it slides beneath the range of human hearing, traveling through the ground and the air like a physical wave. To us, it might feel like a sudden anxiety, a trembling in the chest, but to her family, it is a command as clear as a bell. Close ranks. The reaction is immediate and practiced. The scattered members of the herd, sisters, daughters, nieces, and their calves, abandon their grazing and move toward her. They do not run. Panic burns energy. They simply drift together until they form a tight, dark knot against the blinding white. This is the tactile convoy. In the swirling confusion of the storm, vision is useless. The dust coats their eyes, and the snow creates a mesmerizing, dizzying pattern that can cause vertigo. So, they switch to touch. Each mammoth maintains physical contact with another. A trunk rests on a flank, a shoulder presses against a hip. The calves are ushered into the center of the formation, a warm, sheltered pocket protected by a ring of hairy giants. One particularly small calf, barely a year old and looking like a fuzzy boulder, reaches out and wraps the tip of his trunk around his mother's tail, holding on with the desperation of a toddler in a crowded market. It is a behavior seen in modern elephants, a literal lifeline that ensures he will not be swallowed by the void. The matriarch begins to walk. She does not wander aimlessly. She is heading for a specific destination, a ravine 5 miles away, where the cliff walls will break the wind and the snow might be less deep. How she knows this is one of the great marvels of animal cognition. The landscape has been erased. There are no landmarks visible, no sun to guide her, only a wall of flying silt. Yet she moves with absolute certainty. Scientists and ethologists call this cognitive mapping, but on the steppe, it is something more profound. It is ancestral memory. She is following a map drawn not on paper, but on the neurons of her brain, etched there by the memories of her own mother and grandmother. She recalls the shape of the land beneath the snow, the subtle incline of the slope, the way the wind sings differently when it hits the valley floor. She is the captain of a ship navigating a foggy ocean, steering by the feel of the currents. As they march, the storm intensifies. The dust, kicked up from the glacial plains miles away, mixes with the snow to create a stinging slurry. It pastes against their coats, freezing into a hard armor on their windward sides. But inside the formation, the air is calmer. The massive bodies of the adults act as windbreaks, creating a moving bubble of still air for the little ones. The heat radiating from 10 or 12 multi-ton bodies raises the temperature within the huddle significantly. They are a self-contained heating system. The matriarch sets a pace that is agonizingly slow but relentless. She knows that to stop in the open is to risk being buried or separated. Every few minutes she pauses, rumbling again, waiting for the answering vibrations from the rear of the line. "Are you there?" "We are here. Keep moving." It is a conversation of pure reassurance. There is a touching debate among paleontologists regarding the composition of these herds during such crises. While modern elephant herds are strictly matriarchal, females and young only, with adult males living solitary lives, some evidence from fossil trackways suggests that mammoths may have been more flexible. In the brutal conditions of the Ice Age, where the dusty dark could last for days, solitude was a dangerous luxury. Some tracks show mixed groups, suggesting that perhaps the teenage males or even adult bulls might have lingered closer to the family units than their modern cousins do, tolerated for their extra warmth and body mass during the worst of the winter. Imagine a sullen teenage bull, usually eager to prove his independence, sheepishly sneaking back into the edge of the family huddle when the storm hits, trading his dignity for a bit of shelter. The matriarch, wise and pragmatic, likely allows it. Survival comes before protocol. The sensory experience of this march is overwhelming. The sound of the wind is a deafening roar, drowning out footfalls, yet the mammoths move in a bubble of relative silence, communicating through the floor. The ground vibrates with their passage. Their wide feet, designed to spread their weight over the snow and soft soil, act as sensitive receivers, picking up the location of every member of the group. If one falls behind, the vibration changes and the matriarch stops instantly. No one is left behind. This loyalty is not just sentimental, it is evolutionary. A lost calf is a dead calf, and a dead calf means the energy invested in its birth and nursing is wasted. In a biological sense, love is the most efficient survival strategy of all. Hours pass. The light, which was already dim, fades into true darkness. But the matriarch does not stop. She smells the change before she sees it, a shift in the scent of the air, a hint of damp stone and pine resin. The ravine is close. The ground begins to dip, and the ferocious wind suddenly loses its teeth, blocked by the rising walls of a limestone canyon. The snow here is thinner. the air still. The herd slows, finally coming to a halt in the shelter of the cliffs. They do not disperse. They remain in their tight cluster, a mountain of warmth in the night. The calves collapse into the snow, exhausted by the trek, instantly asleep against the legs of their mothers. The adults stand guard, dozing on their feet, their trunks hanging limp, their eyelashes heavy with ice. The storm rages above the canyon rim, a furious river of wind and dust screaming across the sky. But down here, in the dark, there is peace. The matriarch shakes her head, dislodging a shelf of snow from her hood, and lets out a long, soft exhale that plumes in the cold air. She has delivered them. The map in her mind held true. In this moment, she is more than just an animal. She is the keeper of the timeline, the bridge between the past and the future. Without her memory, the dust would have claimed them. As she closes her eyes, allowing herself a moment of rest, her stomach rumbles, a loud, gurgling reminder that the engine needs fuel. The storm has bought them safety, but it has also buried their food. Tomorrow, the work of clearing the snow will begin. And in doing so, in their constant quest for grass, they will perform their second great service to the steppe. They are not just travelers on this land, they are its architects. As the sun rises on a buried world, we will see how their heavy footsteps do more than just carry them forward. They actually build the garden that feeds them. The morning breaks with a clarity that only comes after a storm. The sky, scrubbed clean of the haze for a brief few hours, is a piercing, impossible blue, hanging over a world reinvented by white. The ravine where the herd slept is silent, save for the groaning of the matriarch as she heaves herself up from the snowbank. It is a slow, tectonic movement, 6 tons of biology fighting gravity. As the rest of the family stirs, shaking the frost from their coats in great dusty clouds, they prepare to return to the open plains. But as they climb out of the shelter and back onto the wind-scoured steppe, they do not simply walk across the land. They change it. To the casual observer, a herd of mammoths might look like a destructive force, a parade of bulldozers flattening everything in their path. But in the grand ecological design of the Pleistocene, they are not destroyers. They are gardeners. They are the custodians of the grassland, and their heavy, destructive footsteps are the very tools that keep this world alive. We often think of nature as something that exists independently of the animals that live in it, a stage set upon which the actors perform. But here, the actors built the stage. As the herd moves toward a patch of grazing land, they encounter a cluster of young spruce trees attempting to take root in a sheltered depression. These saplings are the enemies of the steppe. If left unchecked, they will grow into a dark, dense forest, blocking the sun, changing the soil chemistry, and choking out the nutritious grasses that the mammoths rely on. The matriarch does not hesitate. She approaches a sapling, wraps the base of her trunk around it, and with a casual, almost dismissive shove, snaps it at the base. She steps on the broken branches, grinding them into the dirt. A younger male, feeling playful, uproots another, tossing it aside. It looks like vandalism. In reality, it is weeding. By aggressively removing trees and shrubs, mammoths prevented the forest from closing in. They kept the canopy open, ensuring that sunlight could reach the soil, fueling the rapid growth of the high-protein grasses. Without the mammoths to knock them down, the trees would have marched north thousands of years earlier, and the great pasture would have vanished. But their role as engineers goes deeper than just pest control. Look at the ground where they have just walked. The snow, which had settled in a fluffy, insulating blanket, has been smashed down, compacted into hard ice, or cleared entirely to reveal the earth. This seems like a minor detail, but it has profound consequences for the planet's climate. Fluffy snow acts like a down comforter. It traps the heat of the earth, keeping the soil relatively warm even in winter. By trampling the snow, mammoths destroyed this insulation. They allowed the brutal Arctic air to penetrate deep into the ground, freezing the soil solid. This sounds harsh, but it was vital. It preserved the permafrost, the continuously frozen layer of earth that locks away billions of tons of carbon and methane. Scientists and ecologists working in Siberia today, attempting to recreate this mammoth steppe in a project known as Pleistocene Park, argue that the loss of the mammoths actually contributed to global warming. Without the herds to tramp down the snow, the ground became warmer, the permafrost began to melt, and the ecosystem shifted from a firm, dry grassland to a boggy, methane-leaking tundra. The mammoths were, quite literally, refrigeration units for the Arctic. As the herd feeds, tearing up great clumps of dry fescue, they engage in another act of massive-scale landscaping: fertilization. A single adult mammoth consumes roughly 400 pounds of vegetation every single day. What goes in must come out. As they move across the landscape, they leave behind massive quantities of dung, warm, steaming piles of processed organic matter that dot the white snow like milestones. In a cold, dry environment where decomposition is agonizingly slow, nutrients tend to get locked in dead plant matter unavailable for new growth. The mammoths accelerated this cycle. Their complex guts broke down the tough grasses, extracting the energy and returning the nitrogen, phosphorus, and calcium back to the soil in a readily available form. They were mobile compost heaps, turning the nutrients of the vast plains over and over again. Wherever the herd walked, the grass grew greener, taller, and richer the following spring. They were farming the very food they depended on. This creates a fascinating, circular relationship. The mammoths needed the steppe to survive, but the steppe needed the mammoths to exist. It is a concept known as a positive feedback loop. The more mammoths there were, the more they trampled the moss and knocked down the trees. The more they did that, the more grass grew. The more grass grew, the more mammoths the land could support. It was a perfect, self-sustaining engine that ran for millennia. It challenges the lonely survivor myth of the Ice Age. These animals weren't just scraping by in a frozen wasteland. They were actively managing a high-productivity agricultural estate that spanned 2 continents. There's a smaller, more intimate level to this gardening as well. As the matriarch walks, her massive feet, broad, cracked, and callous, act like plows. They churn up the soil, breaking the hard, frozen crust and allowing seeds to find purchase in the earth. In the spring, the footprints of mammoths become tiny, localized ponds. Meltwater collects in the deep depressions left by their weight, creating microhabitats for insects, frogs, and specialized plants that need a bit more moisture. A single trackway can become a nursery for a dozen different species. We see this today in Africa, where elephant footprints fill with water and serve as life-saving reservoirs for butterflies and small birds. In the dusty, dry world of the Pleistocene, these footprint puddles were oases in miniature. However, the most dramatic evidence of their impact is often invisible to the naked eye. It lies in the albedo effect. Grasslands are light in color, gold, tan, and pale green. They reflect a significant amount of the sun's energy back into space. Forests, particularly coniferous forests like spruce and pine, are dark. They absorb heat. By keeping the land free of dark trees and encouraging the growth of pale grasses, the mammoths helped to actually keep the local climate colder. They were maintaining the refrigerator they lived in. It is a sobering thought, a biological force so powerful it influenced the temperature of the air itself. As the afternoon wears on, the herd moves with a slow, rhythmic purpose. The sound of their passage is a mix of heavy thuds, the tearing of grass, and the occasional sharp crack of a shrub being flattened. They are heavy, yes, but they are not clumsy. Watch the matriarch use her tusk to gently scrape away a patch of hard snow, revealing the freeze-dried grass beneath. She does not gouge the earth, she skims it. Her tusk is a precision instrument, polished smooth by years of this work. She clears a patch not just for herself, but for the calf standing in her shadow. The little one, still learning the trade, mimics her, rooting around in the exposed grass, picking out the tenderest shoots. He is inheriting a kingdom that requires constant maintenance. He does not know that his survival depends on the destruction of the trees. He only knows that where his mother walks, food appears. There is a gentle humor in watching them garden. They are not meticulous. They are messy, boisterous, and large. A young male, bored with the serious business of eating, decides to fight a large bush, headbutting it until it is nothing but a collection of twigs. He looks pleased with himself, ears flapping, tail twitching. He has no idea he has just performed a vital ecological service. He just likes the sound of snapping wood. But nature uses every impulse. The play of calves, the aggression of bulls, the steady marching of the cows, all of it is harnessed to keep the steppe open, grassy, and dusty. As the sun begins to lower again, casting those long blue shadows across the snow, we realize that the mammoth steppe is not empty. It is inhabited by a cast of characters who follow in the wake of the giants, relying on the world the mammoths have built. The path the matriarch has cleared through the deep snow is not just for her, it is a highway. And looking back along the trackway, we see movement. Smaller shapes are using the road the mammoths paved. The giants are the icebreakers of this frozen ocean, and in their wake, a diverse and dangerous flotilla of life is following close behind. The woolly rhino, the bison, and the silent, deadly hunters are all neighbors in this haze, and they are all watching the herd. The road the herd leaves behind, a wide, trampled avenue of churned snow and exposed earth, does not stay empty for long. In the ruthless economy of the steppe, energy is the only currency that matters, and breaking a fresh trail through deep snow costs a fortune in calories. The other creatures of the plains know this. They watch the mammoths waiting for the heavy lifting to be done, and then they slip into the wake of the giants like commuters merging onto a cleared highway. The first of these neighbors to emerge from the dusty gloom is a creature that seems less like an animal and more like a siege weapon wrapped in fur. It is the woolly rhinoceros, Chelodonta antiquitatis, a beast that rivals the mammoth in sheer prehistoric charisma, if not in height. He steps onto the pack trail with a stiff, grumpy gait, his head hung low, swaying rhythmically just inches above the ground. If the mammoth is the majestic ocean liner of the steppe, the woolly rhino is the armored tank. He is a magnificent, solitary grump. Covered in a coat of thick, rusty gold hair, he weighs nearly 2 tons, a dense block of muscle and bad attitude. But his most defining feature is the terrifying architecture on his nose. He carries 2 horns, the front one a massive flattened blade of keratin that can grow over 3 feet long. Unlike the conical daggers of modern African rhinos, the woolly rhino's horn is shaped like a shovel, broad, flat, and worn smooth on the leading edge. Paleontologists believe this was a tool of convergence. Just as the mammoth uses a tusk to sweep away snow, the rhino used this bladed horn to sideswipe the drifts, clearing his own patch of grass with a violent toss of his head. But why work if you don't have to? He uses the mammoth's path to travel between grazing sites, conserving his strength. The relationship between the mammoth and the rhino is one of mutual respectful avoidance. They are the 2 heavyweights of this world, and like bouncers at a crowded club, they give each other a wide berth. The rhino has terrible eyesight, a common trait in his family, made worse by the constant haze of silt. He relies almost entirely on smell and hearing. If the matriarch stops too suddenly, or if a calf strays too close to the rhino's personal space, the reaction is instant. A sharp, explosive snort, a lowering of that deadly horn, and a feinted charge. The mammoths, wise to his temperament, simply ripple their ears and step aside. They know that while they have the height advantage, the rhino is a dense projectile with a low center of gravity. It is better to let the grumpy uncle pass. Drifting behind the rhino, moving with a lighter, more nervous energy, are the herds of steppe bison and wild horses. These are the common citizens of the mammoth steppe, their numbers in the millions. The bison priscus, are giants in their own right, taller and more athletic than their modern American cousins, with horns that span nearly a meter wide. They are the noisy neighbors, constantly grunting and jostling. They follow the mammoths not just for the path, but for the protection. In a world of low visibility, where the dust can hide a predator until it is 10 feet away, standing next to a 6-ton alarm system is a solid survival strategy. If the mammoths panic, the bison run. It is a cascading alarm network that ripples across the plains. But there is one neighbor who does not use the path to graze, and who does not fear the dust. In fact, he prefers it. Moving parallel to the herd, keeping to the tall, uncut grass where his tawny coat blends perfectly with the dry stalks, is the true king of the stealthy approach. This is the cave lion, Panthera spelaea. To call him a lion is to perhaps understate the reality. He is a monster, roughly 10 to 15% larger than the biggest modern African lion, a muscular cat built for brute force. But unlike the lions we know, he likely possesses no mane. Cave paintings discovered in France and Russia depict these cats as sleek, uniform shadows, their profiles smooth and aerodynamic. In the freezing wind of the steppe, a large, shaggy mane would collect ice and snow, becoming a heavy, matted liability. So he is stripped back, efficient, a ghost in the gray wind. Historians and zoologists still argue passionately about the social lives of these great cats. Did they live in prides like the lions of the Serengeti, or were they solitary hunters like tigers? The evidence is conflicting. Some caves contain the bones of many lions together, suggesting a social group. Yet, the scarcity of prey in winter might have forced them to hunt alone or in pairs. The prevailing theory suggests they were perhaps more flexible than modern cats, banding together when the great migrations moved through and dispersing into the mist when the herds thinned out. What is certain is that they respected the mammoth. A healthy adult mammoth is virtually invulnerable to predation. The sheer height, the thick skin, and the terrifying reach of the tusks make it a fortress that cannot be stormed. The cave lion knows this. He is not watching the matriarch. He is watching the stragglers. There's a palpable tension when the scent of the cat hits the herd. The mammoths do not run. Running triggers the chase reflex, but they change formation. The tactile convoy tightens. The calves are ushered deeper into the forest of legs. The matriarch turns to face the wind, her trunk raised like a periscope, tasting the air for the metallic tang of the predator. The lion, seeing the wall of tusks and shaggy shoulders close ranks, usually turns away with a disdainful flick of his tail. He is a calculator of risk. He is looking for the injured, the old, or the foolish. He will wait for a blizzard, for a moment when the wind screams loud enough to mask the sound of his approach, when the dust is thick enough to hide his golden form until the final second. This interplay between predator and prey is complicated by the unique atmosphere of the steppe. The 20 times dustier climate creates a visual environment that is deceptive. Shadows are softened, distances are hard to judge. In the glare of a whiteout or the brownout of a dust storm, the advantage shifts to the hunter. The lion's eyes are adapted for low light. The mammoth's are not. The lion can freeze, becoming a rock, a hummock of grass. The mammoth is always a mountain. It is a high-stakes game of hide-and-seek played in a room full of smoke. Yet, there are moments of strange peace. When the storm lifts and the sun warms the backs of the animals, you might see them all in a single tableau. The mammoths tearing at the willows near a riverbed, the rhino dozing in a sunbeam like a giant, dangerous dog, the bison grazing in the middle distance, and the lion resting on a rocky outcrop, watching it all with heavy-lidded indifference. They are a community. They know each other's habits, their sounds, their smells. They are bound together by the ice and the dust. They have co-evolved to fit this puzzle perfectly. The mammoth clears the snow for the bison. The bison's alarm calls warn the rhino. The rhino's aggressive defense deters the wolf pack that might harass the lion's kill. It is a web of life, fragile and fierce. But as the herd moves on, leaving the lion behind to wait for darkness, they are unaware that there's another set of eyes watching them from the ridge. These eyes do not belong to a cat or a wolf. They belong to a creature that is physically pathetic compared to the giants, slow, hairless, lacking claws or fangs. A creature that should, by all rights, freeze to death in the first hour of a steppe winter. But this creature has something the lion does not. It has a mind that can reimagine the world. It looks at the mammoth and sees not just a mountain of meat or a dangerous adversary, but a warehouse of raw materials. It sees a house in the ribs, a spear in the tusk, a roof in the skin. The interaction between mammoths and humans is often painted as a simple war of spears and blood, but the truth is far more architectural. As we follow the herd further north, approaching the edge of their range, we begin to see strange shapes rising from the horizon, domes that break the flat line of the plains. They are not hills. They are not caves. They are constructions. The neighbors in the haze are not just animals anymore. They are builders, and they have built their world out of the bodies of the giants. We are about to enter the village of bones, where the line between the mammoth as an animal and the mammoth as a foundation blurs completely. As we drift closer to the strange silhouettes rising from the white horizon, the wind seems to change its voice. It no longer just hisses through the grass, it whistles, a hollow, flute-like sound created by air rushing through gaps in a structure unlike anything else in nature. We have arrived at one of the most hauntingly beautiful settlements in human history, a place where the line between the hunter and the hunted has been erased by the necessity of survival. These are the mammoth bone houses of the Upper Paleolithic, dwellings found across the plains of what is now Ukraine and Russia. To the modern eye, they look like something from a dark fantasy, cathedrals built of ivory and rib. But to the people living here, 15,000 years ago, they are simply home. In a treeless world where wood is as precious as gold and stones are buried under feet of permafrost, the mammoth provides the only timber available. The herd is not just food. The herd is the forest. Standing before the largest of these huts, we are struck by the sheer scale of the architectural ambition. This is not a hastily thrown together lean-to. It is a masterpiece of dry stone walling. Only the stones are the skulls, mandibles, and femurs of giants. The foundation is a perfect circle, some 20 feet across, defined by the massive skulls of mammoths arranged in a ring, their heavy brows facing outward like gargoyles, warding off the evil spirits of the blizzard. Above this grim foundation, the walls rise in an intricate interlocking pattern. The builders have used the lower jaws, the mandibles, stacked in a herringbone design, fitting the chin of one bone into the gap of another with the precision of a bricklayer. It creates a texture that is surprisingly pleasing to the eye, a rhythmic weaving of white bone that catches the low light of the sun. It is early functionalism. The heavy bones are dense, windproof, and thick enough to provide insulation that a simple skin tent never could. The roof is the crowning glory. Without long wooden beams to span the width of the hut, the architects have turned to the tusks. Dozens of curved ivory beams arc overhead, meeting in the center to form a dome that supports a heavy covering of reindeer hides, sod, and perhaps more tusks to weigh it all down against the gale. Standing inside, looking up, one would feel as though they were resting inside the belly of the beast itself, protected by the very ribs that once shielded the mammoth's heart. There is a profound poetry in this. The animal that conquered the cold through biology now conquers the cold for humanity through its remains. But the question that whispers through these ivory arches is, where did all these bones come from? A single hut can contain the remains of nearly 100 mammoths, 95 mandibles, 40 skulls, hundreds of ribs. Did a small band of humans truly slaughter 100 giants to build a living room? Historians and archaeologists still argue fiercely over this. One camp portrays these people as super predators, capable of wiping out entire herds in a single season to harvest construction materials. The other, perhaps more pragmatic view, suggests that the steppe was littered with the skeletons of animals that died naturally over centuries, boneyards, accumulated at river crossings or in valleys where the snow drifted deep. In this view, humans were not just hunters, but scavengers of architecture, dragging the bleached frozen timbers of the past miles across the snow to build their future. It is a less violent image, one of recycling on a grand scale. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in the middle, a few successful hunts supplemented by a lot of heavy lifting of found objects. Step inside the hut. The transition from the screaming wind outside to the interior is startling. It is quiet here. The thick walls of bone and earth dampen the sound of the storm to a dull thrum. The air is warm, thick, and smells of a very specific, pungent smoke. In a land without firewood, what do you burn? You burn the only fuel the steppe provides in abundance, fresh bone. Green bone, still rich with marrow and grease, burns hot and slow, like a heavy log. It produces a greasy, dark smoke, but it keeps the frost at bay. The hearth in the center of the hut is a pit dug into the permafrost, filled with the charred knuckles of the giants. Around the fire, life happens. This is not a grim tomb. It is a domestic space. Furs are piled thick on the floor, wolf, fox, and bear skins softening the ground. Tools are scattered about, flint scrapers, bone needles, and perhaps a small figurine carved from soft stone. There's a sense of crowded intimacy here. A family of 10 or 15 people might share this space, sleeping shoulder to shoulder for warmth. It is a cozy arrangement, provided you don't mind the fact that your structural support beam is a leg bone that weighs as much as you do. One imagines the interior decorating disputes were brief. Shall we put the skull by the door? Yes, it goes with the other 40 skulls. But amidst the grim materials, there is art. We have found mammoth tusks in these sites that are not just structural, but canvas. Etched into the ivory are complex geometric patterns, dots and lines that may be lunar calendars or maps of the river systems. Even here, in the dark of winter, the human mind is trying to measure time, to impose order on the chaos of the wild. The relationship between the people in the hut and the herds moving past is complex. It is not one of pure animosity. There is reverence. You cannot live inside the skull of an animal without thinking about its spirit. Some anthropologists suggest that the layout of the bones wasn't just structural, but ritualistic, an attempt to resurrect the animal or to honor its strength. By living inside the mammoth, the humans might have hoped to borrow its resilience, to cloak themselves in its power. When the wind howls at night, vibrating the tusks in the roof, does it sound like the herd calling? Do the children sleeping under the ribs dream of the long march? The hut is a fortress, but it is also a trap. It anchors the humans to one spot. The mammoths, however, are not anchored. As the season deepens and the local grazing is exhausted, the herd begins to feel the pull of the great migration. The humans watching from their bone porches know this sign. The matriarchs are becoming restless, their rumbles louder, their movements more directed. The 20 times dustier wind is shifting direction, signaling a change in the weather patterns. The static safety of the bone village is about to be contrasted with the dynamic endurance of the road. The humans can stay in their warm, smoky domes, eating their stored meat, but the giants must move or die. And so, we leave the village of bones, the smoke rising from its vents like a prayer into the gray sky. We drift back out to the open plain, where the living architecture is preparing to depart. The matriarch has made her decision. The snow in this valley is too deep to clear. The willows are stripped bare. The herd must travel hundreds of miles to the summer grazing grounds in the north, a journey that will test the calves and the old alike. This is the seasonal pulse of the steppe, a rhythmic expansion and contraction of life across the continent. The stillness of winter is breaking. The great march is about to begin, and the ground itself will tremble with the passage of the gray kings. We move with them now, leaving the static dead to guard the living as the herd steps into the swirling mist of the migration. The village of Bone fades into the white mist behind us, a static island in a river of movement, and we are once again swept up in the current of the giants. The matriarch has set her face to the north, and the herd follows with a loose, shambling discipline. This is not a casual stroll. This is the Great March, the defining rhythm of their existence. For decades, we assumed that mammoths were relatively sedentary, wandering locally like cows in a very large pasture. But the chemistry of the past has revealed a truth far more exhausting. These animals were nomads on a continental scale. They were travelers who measured their lives not in years, but in horizons crossed. To understand the sheer magnitude of this journey, we must look at the flight recorder that every mammoth carried on its face, the tusk. A mammoth's tusk is more than a weapon or a snow shovel. It is a biological diary. It grows continuously from the base, adding new layers of ivory every day, stacking up like a pile of ice cream cones. As the tusk grows, it locks in the chemical signature of the water and plants the animal consumed at that specific moment. Specifically, it traps strontium isotopes, variations of a mineral found in soil and water that differ from region to region. By analyzing the ratio of these isotopes along the length of a tusk, Scientists can retrace the animal's steps with startling precision years after its death. It is a chemical GPS. One famous study of a male woolly mammoth from the Brooks Range in Alaska revealed a staggering itinerary. In his 28 years of life, this single animal walked a distance equivalent to circling the Earth twice. He didn't just live in the Arctic, he toured it. The herd is moving now to chase the green wave, or perhaps in this dust-choked epoch, the gray-green wave. As the tilt of the Earth brings the sun back to the high latitudes, the snow begins to thin, and the grasses surge into life. But the steppe is vast, and the greening happens in stages. The mammoths are surfing this tide of productivity. They must time their arrival perfectly. Too early, and the ground is still locked in ice, the food buried. Too late, and the grass has already been eaten by the bison herds or withered by the dry winds. It is a high-stakes race against the seasons, played out at a walking speed of 3 miles per hour. The sensation of the march is hypnotic. It is a world of rhythm. Thump, swish, thump, swish. The sound of 60 feet hitting the permafrost creates a low-frequency drone that can be felt in the soles of your feet miles away. The dust is their constant companion here, too. As thousands of animals move north, for the mammoth herd has joined a superhighway of migration alongside caribou and horses, the silt is kicked up into a permanent low-hanging cloud. They are walking inside their own atmosphere. This dust is gritty and pervasive, coating the insides of their trunks, forcing them to blow clear with sharp trumpet-like sneezes that sound like sudden bursts of laughter in the fog. There is a debate among historians and ethologists about how these migrations were learned. Was it pure instinct, a genetic compass pointing north? Or was it cultural, a lesson taught by the elders? The consensus leans toward culture. The matriarch is not just following a magnetic pull, she is remembering landmarks. She remembers the shape of a distant mountain range that looks like a sleeping bear. She remembers the bitter taste of the water in the alkaline flats and leads the herd wide to avoid them. She remembers the river crossings. Ah, the rivers. These are the most terrifying punctuation marks in the long sentence of the march. The landscape of the steppe is cut by massive braided rivers fed by glacial meltwater. In the summer, they are swollen, icy, and treacherous. The herd approaches the bank of a gray, churning torrent, the water thick with rock flour, glacier milk. The matriarch stops. The calves, sensing the tension, press against the legs of the adults. Mammoths are excellent swimmers. Their buoyancy is aided by their massive fat layers, and their trunks act as built-in snorkels. But the current is fast and the water is cold enough to stop a heart. The matriarch tests the water with a tentative foot, then wades in. The others follow, a chain of giants entering the flood. The water rises past their knees, their bellies, until they are submerged, only the domes of their heads and the tips of their trunks visible, like a fleet of hairy submarines. The current pushes hard against them. A calf, lighter and less stable, loses his footing and is swept downstream, bobbing like a cork. There's a moment of silent panic. Mammoths do not scream in the water, but his mother is there. She uses her body to break the current, creating an eddy of calmer water, and uses her trunk to gently guide him back to the line. They emerge on the far bank, dripping, shivering, their coats plastered to their bodies, looking suddenly smaller and more vulnerable. They dust themselves with dry silt immediately, a primitive towel to soak up the moisture before the wind freezes it. The march also serves a social function. It is during these great movements that different family groups meet. The isolation of the winter breaks. On the open plains, 2 herds might converge, and for a few days they travel together. The air fills with a cacophony of rumbles, trumpets, and chirps. It is a reunion. Young bulls who have been trailing the families seize the opportunity to spar, locking tusks with a clatter that sounds like stones striking together. They are not fighting to the death. They are wrestling, testing their strength, learning the physics of their own bodies. A young male, perhaps 15 years old and feeling full of himself, challenges a peer. They push and shove, kicking up clouds of dust until one slips and sits down hard with a look of utter indignity. The victor waves his trunk in a triumphant flourish, only to be ignored by the females, who are far more interested in a patch of particularly succulent sagebrush. But the march is not endless. As the weeks pass, the sun climbs higher. The days lengthen until the sun barely sets, dipping toward the horizon and bouncing back up again, the midnight sun. They have reached the high summer grounds, the mammoth steppe at its peak production. The dust here is different. It is not the heavy grit of the southern plains, but a finer golden haze. The grass is tall, reaching the bellies of the calves. Wildflowers, forget-me-nots, poppies, and asters dot the landscape in defiance of the monochrome. For a brief window of 3 months, life is easy. The food is everywhere. The wind is warmer. The calves play, chasing the lemmings that dart through the grass. Yet, even here, in the land of plenty, the 20 times dustier reality imposes its rules. The constant haze filters the sunlight, possibly reducing the vitamin D synthesis in their skin. Some scientists argue that this lack of clear sunlight might have made mammoths prone to bone diseases, a theory supported by some fossils showing signs of osteoporosis. It paints a picture of a species always balancing on a knife edge, plenty of food, but a harsh, dim environment that slowly sapped their strength. They were giants living in a permanent twilight. As the herd settles into the summer rhythm, grazing in the golden haze, they are unaware that this season of plenty is the most dangerous time for a different reason. The abundance attracts everyone. The predators have followed the migration too, and in the tall grass under the cover of the dust clouds, the visibility is poor. The open plain, usually their greatest defense, becomes a labyrinth of scents and shadows. The matriarch stops eating. She has heard something, not the wind, not the river, but the snap of a dry stalk in a place where no mammoth is standing. The silence of the predator is about to meet the vigilance of the prey. The summer on the mammoth steppe is a season of deception. To the casual eye, it is a time of peace, a golden idyll where the sun loops endlessly across the sky and the grass waves in a hypnotizing rhythm. But this abundance of life brings with it a density of death. The herds have converged, and where the meat goes, the eaters of meat follow. In this 20 times dustier world, the predator has a unique ally, the air itself. We tend to think of hunting as a matter of speed and claws, but on the steppe, it is a game of optics. The constant haze of glacial flour diffuses the light, softening edges and flattening depth perception. It creates a visual landscape where a 500-pound cat can stand perfectly still in the open and look like nothing more than a hummock of dry earth. The dust is a traitor to the prey and a cloak for the hunter. And moving through this sepia-toned fog is the cave lion, Panthera spelaea, a creature that has mastered the art of becoming invisible in plain sight. He is not like the lions of the modern savanna. He is a beast of the cold, larger, heavier, and perhaps more patient. He lacks the magnificent dark mane of his African cousins, a feature that would be a liability here, collecting ice and snow until it froze the animal's neck. Instead, he is sleek, his coat a uniform, tawny beige that matches the dry grass and the dust clouds perfectly. He moves with a liquid, terrifying silence, placing his paws with deliberate care to avoid snapping the brittle sagebrush. He is currently watching the herd from downwind, his golden eyes narrowed against the grit. He is not looking at the matriarch. He knows better. He is watching the edges of the group where the discipline of the formation might fray. He is looking for a calf that has wandered a few steps too far in chase of a butterfly or an adolescent distracted by a patch of clover. The strategy of the cave lion is dictated by the environment. In the clear air of Africa, a lion must use the cover of night or the tall grass to get close. Here, the lion can use the weather. He waits for a dust devil, one of those sudden swirling vortices of wind and silt, to spin across the plain. As the dust creates a momentary curtain, blinding the herd's left flank, he advances. It is a calculated gamble. He moves 30 yards in the confusion, freezing instantly when the air clears. He is playing a game of red light, green light with a 6-ton opponent. This use of atmospheric camouflage is a subject of intense debate among ethologists. Did Pleistocene predators actively understand the cover provided by dust storms? Or did they simply learn by trial and error that hunting was easier when the world turned gray? Given the high intelligence of modern big cats, it is almost certain that Panthera spelaea knew exactly how to weaponize the wind. But the mammoths are not helpless victims. They have their own surveillance system. While their eyes are mediocre, their trunks are biological radar dishes. The matriarch suddenly stops chewing. She hasn't seen the lion. He's just a smudge in the haze. But she has smelled him. The scent of a predator is distinct, acrid, muscular, and terrifyingly sharp against the dusty perfume of the sage. She doesn't trumpet. A trumpet is a sound of panic. Instead, she emits a sharp percussive thwack by slamming the tip of her trunk against the hard ground. It is a seismic warning. The reaction of the herd is instant and geometric. They do not run. Running triggers the chase instinct, and a fleeing calf is an exposed calf. Instead, they flow into the star formation. It is a maneuver of breathtaking coordination. The adults back in toward each other, forming a tight circle with their rumps touching. They face outward, presenting a solid 360-degree wall of tusks and trunks to the world. The calves are herded into the center of this fortress, hidden completely behind the legs of their mothers. To the lion, the herd has suddenly transformed from a group of vulnerable individuals into a single, prickly, impenetrable organism. He stops. The element of surprise is gone. He stands up from the grass, revealing himself, looking distinctly annoyed. There's a dry humor in his expression, the look of a cat that has just jumped for a bird and missed, pretending he meant to do that all along. This standoff highlights a fascinating scholarly argument regarding the diet of these lions. For years, it was assumed that cave lions were mammoth hunters. It adds to the drama of the era. However, recent isotope analysis of lion bones tells a different story. The chemical signatures suggest that these cats primarily ate reindeer and cave bears. Taking down a mammoth was a nightmare scenario, a desperate act reserved for starvation or the very boldest prides. A mammoth is not just big, it is dangerous. A single swipe of a tusk can shatter a spine, a kick can liquidate organs. The lion in our story is likely not hunting the adults, but testing the waters, hoping to panic the herd and isolate a straggler. Seeing the wall of tusks, he makes a calculation. The calorie cost of the fight is higher than the potential reward. He sits down, licks a paw with studied indifference, and yawns. However, the lion is not the only shadow in the mist. While the cat is a solitary or pair-based ambush hunter, the wolves operate on a different philosophy. The gray wolf, Canis lupus, has been a neighbor of the mammoth for hundreds of thousands of years. They do not use silence, they use chaos. A pack of wolves will appear out of the dust, yipping and howling, darting in and out of the herd's vision. They are the pesterers. Their goal is to annoy, to frighten, to make the herd move. They want the mammoths to run, hoping that in the panic, a calf will be separated or an old female will stumble. They are the endurance hunters, willing to trot behind the herd for days, waiting for a moment of weakness. The interaction between the mammoth and the wolf is almost ritualistic. The matriarch despises them. You can see it in her body language. She flares her ears and makes short, aggressive charges, blowing dust at them with her trunk. The wolves scatter like leaves, only to regroup 10 yards away. They are a nuisance, a constant nagging reminder of mortality. But today, the herd is strong. The summer grass has made them heavy and energetic. The wolves, sensing the lack of weakness, eventually lose interest. They drift away into the haze, looking for easier game, perhaps a bison or a sick horse. There's a moment of profound relief when the predators depart. The tension drains from the herd like water from a breached dam. The star formation dissolves slowly. The mothers turn inward, checking their calves with gentle touches of their trunks, sniffing them to ensure they are unharmed. A young calf, who'd been trembling in the center, now marches out with a sudden surge of bravado, swinging his little trunk as if he had personally fought off the lion. The matriarch watches him with a heavy-lidded gaze that suggests she is not impressed, but she is content. The dust settles back into its lazy drift. The silence returns, broken only by the tearing of grass. This constant proximity to death is what gives the mammoth steppe its vitality. The herbivores are strong because the predators are smart. The predators are smart because the herbivores are defensive. It is an arms race that has honed both sides to perfection. But as the sun begins to set, casting long, blood-red shadows through the silt-laden sky, we must remember that the greatest threat to the mammoth is not the lion or the wolf. Those are old enemies, understood and managed. The true threat is something far more subtle, something that cannot be fought with tusks or formations. It is coming not from the grass, but from the sky. The climate itself, the very engine that drives this dusty world, is beginning to stutter. The 20 times dustier equilibrium is about to break, and the first warning signs are not written in blood, but in rain. The change does not begin with a roar, nor with a catastrophe that splits the sky. It begins with a scent. For thousands of generations, the olfactory world of the mammoth has been defined by two primary notes: the dry mineral tang of dust and the sharp, clean bite of frost. But now, as the matriarch leads her family along an ancient trackway they have walked for centuries, she stops. She raises her trunk, the tip quivering as it samples the breeze. There is something new in the air, something cloying and heavy. It is the smell of wet earth. It is the smell of rain. To us, rain is a giver of life, a blessing on the harvest. But on the mammoth steppe, liquid water falling from the sky is a harbinger of doom. It signals that the great atmospheric engine is breaking down. The relentless dry winds that kept the glaciers at bay and the plains arid are weakening. The air is growing warmer, holding more moisture, and the 20 times dustier world is beginning to wash away. This shift is subtle at first, a creeping softness that invades the hard edges of the Pleistocene. The dust clouds that once choked the sun are thinning. The sky is becoming a brilliant, piercing blue more often than not. While this might seem like an improvement, a lifting of the gloom, it is actually a disaster for the ecosystem. The dust was the fertilizer. Without that constant rain of glacial flour, the nutrient cycle begins to stutter. The grass, once tall, brittle, and packed with calcium, begins to change. It grows slower, it loses its crunch. But the more immediate danger lies underfoot. For millennia, the ground here has been like concrete, permafrost locked solid by the lack of insulating snow and the bitter cold. A 6-ton animal could sprint across it without leaving a mark deeper than an inch. But the moisture is changing the physics of the earth. The matriarch takes a step, and for the first time in her life, the ground does not push back. Her foot breaks through the crust. She sinks. It is a sickening sensation, a sudden loss of equilibrium as the earth turns to porridge. She pulls her leg free with a wet, sucking sound. Shh, thuck, mud. It is a substance she is ill-equipped to handle. The anatomy of a mammoth is designed for firm terrain. Their feet are pillars, compact and round, perfect for supporting massive weight on a hard surface. But in deep mud, they are liabilities. The surface area is too small for the weight. The pressure per square inch is immense. She is essentially walking on stilts in a swamp. This softening of the world is known to geologists as polutification, the transformation of dry land into bog. It is the enemy of the giant. As the permafrost melts and the rains come, the water has nowhere to go. It pools on the surface, creating vast, treacherous mires masked by thin layers of vegetation. We see the evidence of this tragedy in the fossil record. So many of the mammoth skeletons we find today are not animals that died of old age or predation. They are animals that were trapped. They are found standing up, their legs locked deep in the blue clay of ancient bogs, preserved in a final posture of struggle. It is a nightmare scenario, a slow, exhausting fight against the suction of the earth, watching the herd move on while the mud holds you fast. The matriarch is wise. She senses the danger in the softness. She guides the herd toward the high ridges, avoiding the valley floors that were once their highways. But this limits their range. The world is shrinking. The vast open ocean of grass is becoming an archipelago of dry islands separated by seas of mud. And with the mud comes a new biological invader. The grass, which loves the dry and the dust, is being outcompeted by plants that love the wet. Moss. If you look closely at the ground now, you see it. Thick, spongy carpets of sphagnum moss are spreading across the steppe. To a human, moss is soft and pleasant. To a mammoth, it is a desert. Moss contains almost no nutrition, it is hard to eat, difficult to digest, and offers zero caloric reward. A mammoth would starve to death with a belly full of it, and worse, the moss insulates the ground differently, changing the temperature of the soil even further, encouraging more melt. It is a green silence spreading over the land, choking out the golden grasses. Historians and climatologists still argue fiercely about the speed of this transition. Was it a slow fade over thousands of years? A long twilight of the steppe? Or was it a sudden shock, a rapid warming event like the Billing-Alarud interstadial, where temperatures skyrocketed in the span of a human lifetime? The anxiety in the herd suggests the latter. There is a tension in their movements now. They are spending more time searching for food, walking past miles of boggy, moss-choked tundra to find the remaining patches of dry steppe. The calves are tired. The easy abundance of the dusty summer is gone. The rain brings another misery: insects. In the dry, windy days of the glacial maximum, mosquitoes and biting flies were rare. The wind kept them grounded, and the lack of standing water kept them from breeding. But now, the boggy, warming landscape is a nursery for billions of them. Clouds of black flies rise from the meltwater ponds, tormenting the herd. The mammoths have no defense against this jagged, buzzing cloud. Their tails are too short to swat them effectively. Their ears are too small to flap them away. They are driven to distraction, spending precious energy shaking their heads and rubbing against rocks to relieve the itch. The matriarch's eyes are swollen, crusted with bites. The dignity of the giant is being eroded by the tiniest of enemies. There is a psychological weight to this section of their history. We often think of extinction as a sudden event, a meteor, a fire. But here, it feels like a betrayal. The world they evolved for, the world that shaped their very blood and bones, is breaking its promise. The lock and key fit between the mammoth and the steppe is jamming. The matriarch feels it in her joints, which ache from the dampness. She feels it in her stomach, which is never quite full anymore. She looks at her calf, and he looks thin. His coat, designed to shed dry snow, is matted with freezing rain. He shivers, a tremor that runs through his whole body. The masterful insulation that defied the blizzards is failing against the wet cold. Water conducts heat away from the body 25 times faster than air. A wet mammoth is a cold mammoth. This is the warning of the thaw. It is not the end, not yet. There are still vast stretches of grass in the north. There are still winters where the old winds blow and the ground freezes hard, allowing them to travel. But the trajectory has shifted. The pendulum is swinging away from them as the herd huddles together in a driving sleet storm, a weather phenomenon that shouldn't exist here. The matriarch rumbles a low, mournful sound. It is not a command. It is a question. She is asking the land where the dust has gone. She is asking why the ground is trying to swallow them. And in the silence that follows, broken only by the hiss of rain on the melting snow, the answer begins to take root around them. The trees are coming. The sentinels of the new world are marching north, and they are bringing the walls that will close the open horizon forever. The invasion does not arrive with the clamor of war, but with the quiet, rustling persistence of a seed taking root. To the matriarch, who has spent her life reading the horizon, the change is visual before it is physical. The endless flat line of the steppe, that comforting geometry of sky and grass, is being broken. Sprouting from the damp, softening soil are the soldiers of the new epoch, the dwarf birch and the spruce. They are not the towering, majestic forests of a storybook, at least not yet. They are scrubby, tangled thickets of Betula nana, waist-high shrubs that huddle together in the hollows, spreading their dark branches like cracks in a windshield. To a human, a field of dwarf birch is a picturesque scene of Arctic beauty. To a mammoth, it is a barrier reef of inedible wood. The green invasion has begun, And with it, the great open highway of the Pleistocene is being closed, acre by acre, year by year. The problem with trees from a mammoth's perspective is multifaceted. The first issue is structural. A woolly mammoth is designed for the open ocean of the plains. Its tusks are enormous, spiraling curved scimitars that can span 10 feet or more. On the steppe, these are magnificent tools for sweeping snow and signaling dominance. But in a dense thicket of birch and willow, they are liabilities. They are grappling hooks. As the herd tries to push through the new growth to reach the grazing grounds beyond, their tusks catch on the branches. The younger animals, lacking the patience of the elders, panic, thrashing their heads to free themselves, only to become more entangled. There is a certain indignity to it, a creature capable of surviving a blizzard being defeated by a shrub. It forces the herd to move in single file, following the paths of least resistance, robbing them of their defensive formations. The forest dictates their movement, channeling them into predictable corridors where the shadows are deep and the sightlines are short. But the deeper betrayal is nutritional. The 20 times dustier world was a salad bowl. This new, greener world is a lumberyard. Spruce and pine needles are filled with terpenes and resins, chemical compounds that taste like turpentine and act as natural insecticides. If a mammoth eats them, these chemicals wreak havoc on the delicate fermentation vat of its stomach, killing the gut bacteria needed to digest food. A mammoth can stand in a forest surrounded by green biomass and slowly starve to death, its belly full of indigestible cellulose. They try to strip the bark to find the cambium layer underneath, but it is poor fuel for a 6-ton engine. The matriarch sniffs a spruce sapling, her trunk recoiling at the sharp acidic scent of pine pitch. It smells alien. It smells of a world that does not want her. This shift in vegetation triggers a collapse of the acoustic web. On the open steppe, the low-frequency rumbles of the herd could travel for miles, passing through the ground and the air without obstruction. A mother could talk to her calf from the other side of the valley, but trees absorb sound. The dense trunks and the carpet of moss dampen the vibrations, cutting the communication lines. The herd becomes quieter, not by choice, but by physics. The world feels smaller, more claustrophobic. The matriarch calls out, a deep, searching thrum, but the sound dies quickly in the thicket, absorbed by the wet wood. The silence of the forest is not peaceful, it is isolating. There is a fierce debate among paleoecologists about the chicken and egg nature of this invasion. Did the mammoths die out, allowing the trees to take over, or did the trees take over, killing the mammoths? For decades, it was assumed that the climate warmed, the trees grew, and the mammoths simply had no place to go. But the keystone herbivore theory suggests a more tragic interplay. As we saw earlier, mammoths were the gardeners who trampled the saplings. If their numbers dropped, perhaps due to human hunting or disease, the gardening stopped. The trees, unchecked, surged forward. This created a vicious feedback loop. The more trees grew, the harder it was for the remaining mammoths to trample them. The forest protected the snow, which insulated the ground, which melted the permafrost, which encouraged more trees. It was an ecological coup d'etat. The mammoths were overthrown by the very saplings they used to crush underfoot. The sensory experience of the herd changes completely. The ground is no longer firm and dry, it is spongy. Sphagnum moss, thick and wet, cushions every step, making the march more exhausting. It sucks the energy out of their legs and the humidity. The air in the forest is stagnant and damp. The mammoths, wearing coats designed for dry, sub-zero winds, begin to overheat even in moderate temperatures. Their wool becomes heavy with moisture, matting and tangling. They are overdressed for the party. You can see the discomfort in the way they rub against the rough bark of the pines, trying to shed their winter coats faster than biology allows. A young male, hot and irritable, leans his entire weight against a pine tree until it snaps with a satisfying crack, toppling over. He looks at it with a sense of grim satisfaction. Take that, botany. Yet, they do not give up. Mammoths are stubborn. They are creatures of habit. The matriarch remembers the northern pastures, the refugia, where the dry wind still blows and the grass still grows. She leads them on a forced march through the encroaching woodland. They become forest ghosts, massive shapes moving silently through the birch mists. It is a surreal image, an animal of the Ice Age pushing through a landscape that looks like a temperate taiga. They are out of time and out of place. Occasionally, they break out of the tree line into a clearing, a mammoth meadow kept open by the grazing of bison or the localized topography. The relief is palpable. The herd spreads out, the calves frolicking in the open space, trunk wrestling and chasing birds. For a moment, it feels like the old days. They feast on the sedges, their grinding teeth working furiously to make up for the lost calories. But the clearing is finite. On all sides, the dark wall of spruce stands watch, creeping closer every season. The horizon, once infinite, is now a jagged line of treetops. The predators, too, have changed. The cave lion, master of the open plains, finds the forest difficult, but the wolves adapt, and a new threat emerges from the shadows of the trees, the brown bear, Ursus arctos. While bears usually avoid healthy mammoths, the chaotic terrain of the forest gives them an advantage. They can ambush. They can separate a calf from the herd using the cover of the thicket. The matriarch is constantly vigilant, her trunk twisting like a snake to check behind every bush. The stress is chronic. The cortisol levels in their hair, which we can measure today, spike during these periods. They are living in a state of high alert, surrounded by an environment that blocks their vision and hides their enemies. As they push further north, chasing the retreating steppe, the herd begins to fragment. The great congregations of thousands are gone. The food density in the forest cannot support them. They split into smaller family units, isolated groups of 5 or 6 trying to navigate the labyrinth. This fragmentation is the beginning of the end. Genetic diversity drops. Inbreeding begins to creep into the bloodlines. The great conversation of the species, once a roaring dialogue across the continent, dwindles to a few whispered exchanges in the dark woods. The green invasion is relentless. It is a slow-motion tsunami of chlorophyll. And as the matriarch steps over a fallen log, her foot sinking into the wet moss, she looks north. There, in the distance, the sky is still pale and dusty. The ice is still there. The islands of their world are shrinking, but they are not gone. There is a place, far at the top of the world, where the ocean rises to meet the land, where the trees cannot grow. It is the final fortress. And so the retreat continues. They are not running away. They are running toward the memory of the dust. They are seeking the last island, the place where the Ice Age refuses to die. The world does not end with a bang, but with a rising tide. For thousands of years, the geography of the Mammoth Steppe was defined by its continuity. It was a supercontinent of grass, a single uninterrupted bridge that allowed a mammoth to walk from the banks of the Seine in Paris all the way to the Yukon River in Alaska without ever wetting its feet in the ocean. This land bridge, known as Beringia, was the central nervous system of the Arctic, a massive, dry corridor that facilitated the flow of genes, herds, and history. But as the Ice Age waned and the great glaciers began to weep their meltwater into the seas, the ocean began to inhale the land. The fragmentation had arrived. It was a silent catastrophe, measured in inches per year, but over centuries, it dismantled the empire of the giants. We find the matriarch now standing at the edge of a new and terrifying boundary. The coast. Where her ancestors would have seen a flat, dusty valley stretching to the horizon, she sees a wall of restless, churning gray water. The smell is wrong. It is salty, sharp, and lacks the comforting earthiness of the steppe. The wind here screams with a different pitch, carrying the spray of the rising Bering Sea. She stands on a bluff, looking east toward a land she can no longer reach. Somewhere out there, across the widening strait, are other herds, cousins, perhaps even sisters who wandered east a decade ago and never returned. But the bridge is broken. The water has risen up to swallow the lowlands, turning hilltops into islands and peninsulas into traps. The great conversation of the species, which once spanned the globe, has been silenced by the roar of the surf. This physical separation marks the beginning of a genetic tragedy. For eons, the health of the mammoth population relied on their mobility. If a local herd became too small or too closely related, fresh blood would always arrive with the migration from the east or west. It was a constant genetic mixing bowl that kept the species robust, erasing bad mutations and strengthening the immune systems of the calves. But as the water rose and the forests closed in from the south, the herds were chopped into smaller and smaller pockets. They became refugees on their own continent. The science of this decline is written in the DNA of the survivors. When we sequence the genomes of these later isolated mammoths, we see the genomic meltdown in real time. It is a heartbreaking biological ledger. We see a loss of olfactory receptors. They were literally losing their sense of smell. We see mutations in their hair structure, suggesting their coats might have become translucent or satiny, losing their insulating power. We even see genetic errors affecting their ability to process urine, hinting at a distinct and rather unroyal loss of bladder control. In a large population, natural selection would aggressively weed out these weak individuals. But in these small, fragmented groups, there was no choice. You mated with who was available, even if they were a cousin with a shiny coat and a bad sense of smell. The survival of the fittest had become the survival of the available. Historians and geneticists still argue about the speed of this collapse. Did the isolation cause immediate problems, or did the herds linger on for thousands of years in a state of genetic purgatory, healthy enough to survive but too broken to thrive? The evidence from the final populations suggests the latter. They didn't just drop dead, they slowly faded, their biological machinery becoming glitchy and inefficient. It is a slow-motion tragedy of errors. The psychological impact on the herd is harder to measure, but impossible to ignore. Mammoths are highly social emotional creatures. They build maps of their world based on relationships and landmarks. Now, the map is shrinking. The matriarch turns the herd away from the ocean, leading them back inland, but they soon hit the tree line. They are boxed in. The vast, infinite loops of their migration are forced into tight, repetitive circles. They are pacing the cage of a changing epoch. The stress of this confinement shows in the fossil record. We see signs of nutritional stress, interrupted growth, and perhaps even increased aggression. The peaceful, dusty giants were becoming anxious prisoners of the Holocene. There is a poignant intimacy to these isolated groups. With no new herds joining them, the family unit becomes the entire universe. The bonds between the members deepen. The matriarch knows every individual in her small band, not just by scent, but by a lifetime of shared entrapment. They are the only witnesses to each other's existence. When a calf is born now, a rare event, it is celebrated with an intensity that borders on desperation. The entire group touches the newborn, rumbling softly, confirming that life, against all odds, continues. But the calves are smaller now. The island rule, or insular dwarfism, has not fully taken hold yet, but the trend is starting. With limited food and limited space, nature is beginning to downsize the giant. The weather, too, has become an enemy. The ocean acts as a massive humidifier. The dry, crisp cold of the 20 times dustier world is replaced by freezing fogs and heavy, wet snows. The dust is gone, replaced by mud and slush. The mammoths, adapted for the dry cold, suffer. Their fur gets wet and stays wet. Pneumonia becomes a silent killer, stalking the calves during the damp winters. The matriarch spends her nights standing over her youngest, acting as a living umbrella, her shaggy bulk shielding him from the freezing rain. She is fighting a war against the climate, and she is losing. Yet, in this fragmentation, there is a strange resilience. These isolated pockets of survivors become incredibly tough. They know every inch of their shrinking territory. They know exactly which windswept ridge will have a patch of exposed grass in January. They know which frozen lake can hold their weight and which one is a trap. They become masters of the microcosm. The Great March is over, replaced by the Great Stand. They are holding the line. One of the most fascinating aspects of this period is the silence of the predators. The great cave lions and the saber-toothed cats are gone, victims of the same environmental collapse. They needed the vast herds in the open plains to hunt. As the ecosystem shattered, the apex predators starved first. The mammoths outlived their monsters. The wolves remain, of course. Wolves always remain. But the terrifying shadows that used to stalk the high grass have vanished. It is a lonely victory. The mammoths are the last kings of a kingdom that is dissolved, ruling over a court of ghosts. As the matriarch leads her family along the rocky shoreline, listening to the waves crash against the cliffs, she pauses. She finds a piece of driftwood, a strange, smooth, salty object that she has never seen before. She sniffs it, turns it over with her trunk. It smells of faraway places. It is a message from the new world, a world of water and wood. She drops it and moves on. She's not interested in the new world. She's looking for the old one. And she knows with the deep intuitive wisdom of her kind that the old world is retreating north. The ice is pulling back, and if they want to survive, they must follow it. They must find the last pieces of land that still remember the cold. The fragmentation is complete. The continental population is shattered. What remains are the ghost herds wandering the peninsulas of Siberia and the islands of the Arctic Ocean. They are the final chapters of the story, written in invisible ink on the edge of the map. And as we follow the matriarch to her final sanctuary, we will see that even in isolation, even in the face of genetic decay and rising tides, the mammoths did not go quietly. They found a fortress, a place where the dust still blew and the time stood still. A place called Wrangell. The wind here is different. It does not carry the scent of pine or the rot of the bog. It tastes of salt, ice, and a profound, aching isolation. We have traveled to the very edge of the map, to a rocky fortress rising from the gray waters of the Arctic Ocean, roughly 90 miles off the coast of Siberia. This is Wrangell Island. To the geographer, it is a speck of land, a geological afterthought separated from the mainland by the rising seas of the Holocene. But to the history of the mammoth, it is not an island. It is a lifeboat. It is the final sanctuary. Here, in this frozen pocket of time, the Ice Age refused to end. While the rest of the world warmed, bloomed, and forgot the giants, Wrangell remained stubborn. It held on to the dry cold, the high winds, and the tough grasses. And because of this, the mammoths here achieved the impossible. They cheated extinction for 6,000 years. The timeline of this survival is one of the most jarring facts in all of history. It disrupts our sense of linear time. We tend to place mammoths in the deep pre-human past, alongside cavemen and saber-toothed cats. But the mammoths of Wrangell broke that rule. As the matriarch of this island herd grazes on a patch of wild celery, she is not sharing the planet with Neanderthals. Far to the south, in a hot, sandy valley called Egypt, human engineers are currently dragging massive limestone blocks across the desert to finish the Great Pyramid of Giza. On an island in the Mediterranean, the Minoan civilization is inventing plumbing. In Britain, people are aligning the massive stones of Stonehenge. And here, in the high Arctic, a woolly mammoth is shaking the snow from her coat, completely unaware that she is a living fossil, a ghost walking in the age of civilization. The distance between the pharaoh and the mammoth is not time, it is merely geography. But if we look closely at this island matriarch, we notice that she is not quite the same as the giants we followed across the steppe. The island rule, a biological principle that dictates that large animals trapped on small islands tend to shrink over generations to conserve resources, has begun to sculpt her. She is smaller. She is not a pygmy in the sense of a pony, but she has lost the terrifying architectural scale of her ancestors. She stands perhaps roughly the height of a modern Asian elephant, maybe a bit shorter. The towering 13-foot shoulders of the mainland bulls are a memory encoded in her genes, but not expressed in her bones. She is a compact edition of the original, designed for a world with limited grass and nowhere to migrate. Scientists and paleontologists still argue passionately about this size difference. Was it true dwarfism, distinct enough to call them a new species, Mammothus primigenius wrangelliensis? Or were they simply regular mammoths who were just stunted, a little bit hungry and a little bit small? The matriarch doesn't care about the taxonomy. She only cares that the willow shrubs here are short, so being shorter helps. The isolation of Wrangell created a unique goldfish bowl ecosystem. The herd here, numbering perhaps never more than 300 to 500 individuals, lived in a closed loop. They walked the same valleys, drank from the same streams, and slept in the same ravines for thousands of years. This intimacy had a cost. The genetic meltdown we witnessed beginning on the mainland has accelerated here. The gene pool is a puddle. If we were to sequence the matriarch's DNA, and we have, we would see a genome riddled with deletions and errors. She has lost the gene that gives her stiffer hair, so her coat is likely softer, silkier, perhaps shimmering with a strange satin-like quality that catches the midnight sun. She may have lost some of her ability to smell certain flowers. She might be prone to digestive issues. It is a portrait of a species that is genetically exhausted, holding on by a thread. And yet, despite the genetic load, they are survivors. They are tough. The island protects them as much as it traps them. The ocean that locks them in also locks the predators out. There are no lions here, no bears, and for thousands of years, no humans. It is a mammoth Garden of Eden, safe, quiet, and lonely. The daily rhythm is slow. Without the need for the great march, the herd moves with a leisurely, almost meditative pace. They cycle around the island's central mountains, following the snowmelt. They have memorized every rock, every dip in the terrain. It is a life of extreme routine. The sensory world of Wrangell is stripped back. It is a world of white, gray, and brown. The silence is heavy, broken only by the cry of seabirds, gulls and guillemots that wheel overhead, confused by these hairy boulders moving below. The mammoths likely ignored the birds, or perhaps with their playful intelligence, found them amusing. One can imagine a calf, bored by the lack of predators to run from, chasing a flock of geese into a pond, swinging his trunk with a delight that transcends species barriers. Play is the universal language of the intelligent, and even at the end of the world, there is time for a game. However, the 20 times dustier climate that birthed their kind is truly gone here. Wrangell is not dusty, it is often damp. Freezing fogs roll in off the sea, cloaking the island in a wet blanket for days. The mammoths huddle together, their satin coats beating with moisture. They rely on the wind to dry them, but the wind here cuts to the bone. To compensate, they likely relied more on their fat reserves. The island mammoths were likely rotund, heavy-set creatures, prioritizing bulk over height. They were the stout yeomen of their dynasty, built for comfort, not speed. There is a fascinating debate about the diet of these final survivors. How did they find enough fuel on a small rock in the Arctic Ocean? The answer lies in the unique microclimate of the island's interior. The valleys of Wrangell trapped just enough heat and protected the ground from just enough snow to allow the old mammoth steppe vegetation to linger. It was a museum of botany. The same wildflowers, sages, and grasses that fed the herds in France 30,000 years earlier were still blooming here in 1700 BC. The mammoths were gardening their own prison, maintaining the ecosystem that kept them alive. As long as they ate the moss and knocked down the birch scrub, the grass remained. It was a fragile equilibrium, sustained by the constant chewing of the herd. But looking at the matriarch, standing on a ridge overlooking the frozen sea, there is a sense of waiting. She looks south, toward the invisible mainland. Does she feel the pull of the ancestral migration? Does her body remember the thousands of miles her foremothers walked? The ghost ache of the lost continent must be there, buried deep in the architecture of her brain. She is a creature of infinite space confined to a finite rock. Occasionally, she rumbles, a low, powerful sound that travels out over the waves. But there is no answer. The mainland is silent. The herds there are dust. She is speaking into a void. The days turn into years, the years into centuries. The pyramids are finished, the Sphinx erodes, kingdoms rise and fall in the south, and on Wrangell the cycle continues. The calves are born, they grow, they die, and their bones are added to the island's soil. It is a slow, quiet fade. There is no dramatic meteor, no sudden volcanic winter. There is just the slow ticking of the genetic clock and the relentless pressure of a changing world. And then, one day, the isolation breaks. It does not break with a storm, but with a silhouette. On the horizon, bobbing on the gray swell of the sea, something appears. It is not a log. It is not a bird. It is moving with intention against the current. The matriarch watches it. She has never seen such a thing. It smells of wood, but also of sweat and smoke. It is a boat. The humans have found the island. The arrival of humans on Vrangle is the subject of the final great controversy. Did they kill the last mammoths, or did they arrive to find a graveyard? The timing is suspiciously close. The last mammoth date overlaps almost perfectly with the first evidence of human harpoons on the beach. But we must not rush to judgment. The end of the story is complex, a mix of bad luck, bad weather, and perhaps a final unfortunate meeting. As the boat grinds onto the shingle beach and the strange, upright figures step onto the sand, the matriarch turns back to her herd. She does not charge. She does not run. She simply watches, a witness to the arrival of the force that will inherit the earth. The silence of the wind is about to be broken by a new sound, and the long, dusty dream of the Ice Age is about to wake up. The boat we saw on the horizon has landed, but the story it brings is not the one we expect. For decades, the prevailing theory of the mammoth's end was a tale of blood and iron, the Blitzkrieg hypothesis. It painted a dramatic, violent picture of humans storming the island, spears in hand, slaughtering the naive dwarf giants in a frenzy of hunting that wiped them out in a matter of years. It is a story that fits our cynical view of human nature. We came, we saw, we killed. But the silence of Wrangel Island tells a different, more complex story. When archaeologists dig into the frozen soil here, they find the remains of the humans, their harpoons, their campfires, their ivory carvings, and they find the bones of the mammoths. But they rarely find them together in the way a crime scene would suggest. There are no kill sites here, no skeletons with flint points embedded in the ribs, no piles of butchered bones stacked by a hearth. The timeline, too, is messy. New radiocarbon dating suggests a gap, a ghost century, between the last reliable mammoth date and the first settled human camp. It is possible, perhaps even likely, that when the first humans stepped onto this rocky beach, shivering in their furs, they did not find a thundering herd. They found a graveyard. They found a silence that had already fallen. If the spear did not end the reign of the giants, what did? The answer, ironically, lies in the very element that allowed them to survive for so long: the water. The 20 times dustier world was dry. It was a world of powder. But the new world was wet, and on a small island in the Arctic Ocean, wetness is a weapon. The leading theory for the final extinction event on Wrangel is not murder, but a rain-on-snow event. It is a weather phenomenon that sounds benign, but is catastrophic for Arctic life. Imagine a winter day where the temperature freakishly spikes, rising just above freezing. The sky opens, and instead of snow, rain falls. It soaks the deep, fluffy snowpack, turning it into a heavy slush. Then, the temperature plunges back down. The slush freezes instantly. The entire island is encased in a sheet of solid, impenetrable ice, a carapace of iron-hard glaze inches thick. To a human, it is slippery. To a mammoth, it is a locked door to the pantry. The matriarch stands on the ridge, her breath pluming in the bitter air. She is hungry. The willows and the grasses are right there, visible beneath the snow, but they are sealed under a layer of ice that her hooves cannot break. She scrapes at the ground, her foot sliding uselessly on the glass-like surface. She tries to use her tusk, but the ice is too thick, and the energy required to chip through it is more than she has left. The herd is surrounded by food, yet they are starving. This icing event does not just affect one valley. On a small island, it covers everything. There is nowhere to migrate to. The last island has become a sealed tomb. Historians and climatologists still argue whether this was a single freak event, a megastorm that wiped them out in one bad winter, or a series of bad years that slowly chipped away at their resilience. The genomic meltdown we saw earlier had already weakened them. They were fragile. A healthy mainland herd might have survived a bad winter, relying on their massive fat reserves. But these islanders were already walking the razor's edge of survival. They had no buffer. The ice was simply the final push. The tragedy of the end is its quietness. There is no roar of battle. There is no panic. There is just a slow, lethargic decline. The calves go first, unable to nurse from mothers who have no milk. The old ones follow. The herd creates a huddle for the last time, not against a lion, but against the hunger. They stand together in a sheltered ravine, their bodies touching, sharing the last of their warmth. The matriarch, the keeper of the timeline, stays on her feet the longest. She nudges the fallen members of her family, rumbling softly, waiting for a response that does not come. She does not understand why the grass is locked away. She does not know that the climate has finally betrayed her completely. There is a profound philosophical weight to this moment. We are witnessing the extinguishing of a consciousness. The mammoth was not just a biological machine. It was a being with memory, emotion, and social complexity. When the last mammoth closes her eyes, a library burns down. The map of the steppe, the knowledge of the winds, the language of the rumbles, it all vanishes in a single heartbeat. The silence that follows is absolute. The wind continues to blow. The snow continues to fall, covering the bodies in a soft, white shroud. The island returns to the birds and the ice. When the humans finally do establish their camp, perhaps a few decades or centuries later, they find the tusks jutting from the snow like the ribs of the earth. They use the ivory. They marvel at the size of the bones. They weave stories about the giant underground oxen that burrow through the earth and die when they see the sun. They respect the ghosts, but they do not know them. The lineage that stretched back 5 million years, from the tropical savannas of Africa to the frozen rocks of the Arctic, has been snapped. Or has it? As the snow buries the last matriarch, freezing her body in the permafrost, the story seems to end. But the cold is a preservative. It is a time capsule. The mammoth does not decay in the way a dinosaur does, turning to stone. She waits. She waits in the dark, frozen solid, her skin intact, her hair preserving its color, her blood, that miraculous anti-freeze blood, crystallized in her veins. She waits for the world to change again. She waits for a new kind of ape, one with tools not of flint, but of glass and metal, to come looking for her. The silence of the wind is not a termination. It is a pause. The deep freeze begins. And in the darkness of the soil, the code of life, the DNA, remains written, waiting for a reader. The centuries roll over Wrangell like waves. The ice sheets retreat further. The modern world rises. Factories smoke, cities sprawl, and the climate begins to warm again, echoing the very forces that drove the giants to this island. And then, a strange noise breaks the silence of the tundra. It is the sound of a helicopter. Men in bright orange parkas step onto the ice. They are not looking for meat. They are looking for information. They have drills. They have scanners. They are about to open the book that was closed 4,000 years ago. The discovery of the mammoth in the modern age is not just an archaeological find. It is an emotional reunion. When we pull a baby mammoth from the ice, like the famous Luba found in 2007, her eyelashes still intact, her trunk still filled with her mother's milk, we are not looking at a fossil. We are looking at a sleeping animal. It strikes a chord in the human heart that a dinosaur bone never could. We feel a strange guilt, a sense of missed connection. We look at the 20 times dustier world she lived in, and we wonder if we can bring it back. The story of the mammoth shifting now from history to science fiction. In laboratories across the world, from Harvard to Seoul, the DNA found in these frozen time capsules is being stitched together. The debate has shifted from how did they die to should we bring them back? The de-extinction movement dreams of editing the genes of an Asian elephant to recreate the woolly mammoth, or at least a functional proxy. They want to put the giants back on the steppe. They want to restore the mammoth steppe ecosystem, to bring back the gardening, the trampling, the fertilization. They believed that the return of the mammoth could help seal the permafrost and slow climate change. It is a bold, controversial, and almost mythical ambition to undo the silence. But before we talk about resurrection, we must honor the remains. The tundra is melting. As the planet warms, the bone cellars of Siberia are opening up. Tusks are rising from the mud by the thousands, fueling a chaotic ivory rush where collectors and ethical debates collide. We are mining the past to feed the present. Yet, amidst the commerce and the cloning, there is the simple, quiet reality of the animal itself. We stand now in a museum, looking at a skeleton. It is tall, imposing, and silent. But if you close your eyes, you can almost hear it. You can hear the crunch of the silica grass. You can feel the vibration of the rumble in your chest. You can smell the sage and the dust. The mammoth is gone, but the impression it left on the world is indelible. It taught us that life is adaptable, that it can conquer the cold, the wind, and the dust. It taught us that even the strongest can fall when the world changes too fast. And so, we reach the end of the timeline. The 20 times dustier world is a memory, preserved in ice cores and pollen samples. The wind still blows across the steppe, but it whistles through empty grass. The giants are sleeping. But in the twilight of our imagination, they are still walking. They are still marching north, chasing the green wave, their shaggy coats swaying, their breath pluming, the eternal guardians of a lost world. They are the reminders that we are just guests on this planet, living in the brief warm spell between the ice. The silence of the Arctic is not empty. It is a vault. For thousands of years, after the last breath left the last matriarch on Wrangel Island, the mammoths did not truly leave us. They simply went underground. The permafrost, that thick frozen crust of soil that covers the top of the world, became the greatest museum curator in history. It wrapped the giants in a cold embrace, locking them away in a state of suspended animation that defies the natural order of decay. In the temperate South, bones turn to dust, and history is erased by the turning of the plow. But here, in the land of the midnight sun, the past is stubborn. It waits. And as we walk the banks of the Siberian rivers today, the Lena, the Kolyma, the Indigirka, we can see the earth giving up its ghosts. The climate that once killed them is now warming enough to reveal them. The 20 times dustier world is gone, but the inhabitants are rising from the mud to tell us their story. This emergence has triggered a modern phenomenon known as the ivory rush. It is a scene of surreal contrast. Men with high-tech GPS units and jet boats navigating the desolate mosquito-choked riverbanks, looking for the curved brown gold of the Pleistocene. As the permafrost cliffs collapse into the sea, they expose the tusks, massive spiraling shapes that look like the roots of overturned trees. Some of these tusks weigh over 200 pounds. They are stained with the blue vivianite of the soil, smelling of ancient damp earth. To the touch, they are smooth, cool, and impossibly heavy. It is a harvest of the dead. This trade is fueled by a fascinating economic loophole. While the ivory of modern elephants is strictly banned to protect the living, the ivory of the mammoth is legal. It is a guilt-free luxury, the only gemstone that comes from an animal that no longer exists. But the true value of these finds is not in the carving, but in the code. Every bone, every tuft of hair, every scrap of skin is a biological hard drive. We are living in the golden age of paleogenomics, a science that allows us to read the diaries of the dead. From a single gram of bone powder, we can reconstruct the entire life history of an animal. Its color, its metabolism, its family tree, even the diseases it carried. We have learned that the mammoths suffered from their own pandemics. We have learned that they interbred with Colombian mammoths in North America. We have learned that they, too, had right-handed and left-handed preferences for using their tusks. The ice has preserved the intimacy of their lives. This access to the blueprint of the mammoth has ignited one of the most passionate and controversial scientific debates of the 21st century: de-extinction. The question is no longer, can we do it, but should we do it? Geneticists at major universities are currently using CRISPR technology to edit the genome of the Asian elephant, the mammoth's closest living relative. They are cutting and pasting the genes for thick hair, subcutaneous fat, and anti-freeze blood into the elephant code. The goal is not to clone a mammoth, the ancient DNA is too fragmented for that, but to create a functional proxy, a mammophant. It is a creature designed to walk like a mammoth, look like a mammoth, and act like a mammoth. The arguments for this resurrection are surprisingly ecological, rooted in the very gardening behavior we observed earlier. Proponents, including the scientists running Pleistocene Park in Siberia, argue that the Arctic needs the mammoth back. They believe that reintroducing these heavy-footed grazers would restore the mammoth steppe. They argue that a herd of thousands of bioengineered mammoths could trample the moss, knock down the dark trees, and expose the grass, thereby increasing the albedo effect, reflecting sunlight, and keeping the permafrost frozen. In this vision, the mammoth is not a Jurassic Park monster. It is a piece of climate engineering technology, a biological machine to save the planet from warming. It is a poetic loop. The animal that died because of climate change is brought back to fight it. The critics, however, whisper a word of caution. They ask about the soul of the animal. If we create a solitary mammothant in a lab, who will teach it to be a mammoth? Who will teach it the migration routes that no longer exist? Who will teach it the language of the rumbles? A mammoth is not just a collection of genes, it is a collection of memories, passed down from matriarch to daughter for 5 million years. That chain is broken. A resurrected mammoth would be an alien on its own planet, a lonely king with no court. Is it an act of redemption or an act of vanity? The debate rages on, played out in ethics committees and laboratories, while the bones in the mud remain silent. There is a specific historical truth that anchors this modern frenzy. The trade in mammoth ivory is not new. It did not begin with modern scientists. The indigenous peoples of the Arctic, the Chukchi, the Yakut, the Inuit, have known about the earth moles for thousands of years. They built their tools from the ivory. They used the bones for sled runners. There are accounts from the 17th century of Chinese traders buying dragon teeth from Siberian merchants, tusks that ended up carved into intricate puzzles in the courts of emperors. The mammoth has been part of the human economy for longer than the steam engine. We have always lived in their shadow. As we stand at the end of this long journey, looking back at the 20 times dustier world, we must acknowledge the power of the mammoth's legacy. They define the Ice Age. When we close our eyes and think of the prehistoric past, we do not see a bison or a horse. We see the silhouette of the high-shouldered giant walking against a white wind. They are the avatars of resilience. They remind us that the earth is dynamic, that landscapes change, that empires of grass can rise and fall. They teach us that adaptation is the key to survival, but that even the most perfect adaptation has its limits. The story of the mammoth is also a story of connection. It connects the dust of the steppe to the ice of the ocean. It connects the ancient hunters of the Ukraine to the modern geneticists of Boston. It connects the very air we breathe, shaped by the carbon trapped in the permafrost, to the heavy footsteps of a herd that vanished 4,000 years ago. They are still shaping our world. The methane bubbling up from the melting lakes is a gas that was trapped when they were walking above it. The grass that grows in the remote valleys of Wrangell is the descendant of the grass they fertilized. They are the ghosts in the machine of the Arctic. And perhaps, in the end, it is better that they remain ghosts. There is a dignity in their rest. The matriarch we followed, from the dust storms of the mainland to the final icy ridge of the island, has earned her sleep. She fought the wind, the lion, the bog, and the hunger. She kept the timeline alive against impossible odds. To disturb her now, to force her descendants back into a world of asphalt and warming skies, feels like a violation of the peace she found. The 20 times dustier world is gone. It belongs to the deep time, to the dream time of the planet. So, let us leave them there. Let us leave them in the permafrost, encased in the diamond-hard ice, their fur swaying in a current that no longer flows. Let us honor them not by bringing them back as curiosities, but by protecting the wilderness that remains. Let us remember the tactile convoy, the star formation, and the gentle rumbling conversations that once filled the silence of the north. The mammoth does not need to walk again to be real. It lives in the imagination, in the awe we feel when we see a tusk rising from the riverbank, a curved monument to a time when giants walked the earth. The camera of our mind pulls back now, rising higher and higher. We see the curve of the earth. We see the white cap of the Arctic shrinking, the green of the forests expanding. We see the lights of cities twinkling where the glaciers once stood. But if we listen closely, beneath the noise of the modern world, we can still hear it. A low, rhythmic thrumming. The sound of the wind blowing over endless grass, the sound of a heavy, confident step on the dry earth, the heartbeat of the steppe. The long, dusty march is over, but the echo remains. The journey is complete. The wind has died down, and the dust has settled back into the earth, returning to the soil from which it came. The great herds have faded into the mist, their massive shapes dissolving into the soft gray light of history. You have walked with them through the storms, stood with them in the sun, and watched them find their final rest. It is time for you to rest now, too. The cold of the Ice Age cannot touch you here. You are warm. You are safe. The heavy protective presence of the matriarch is still with you, a comforting shadow guarding the edges of your sleep. Let the image of the golden grass swaying in the breeze fill your mind. Let the slow, rhythmic breathing of the giants set the pace for your own breath, in and out, slow, steady. The world is quiet. The timeline has paused. There is nothing left to solve, nothing left to learn, nothing left to do but drift. The ice protects the past, and the night protects you. Let go of the day, just as the dust lets go of the wind. Sweet dreams.